Hello friends, welcome to DotVVM virtual conference. It's a pleasure to be here in this virtual form. I hope that you are all safe during this pandemic of COVID-19, and I hope that you will enjoy the sessions we have prepared for you. My name is Thomas Hersek, I'm the founder of the DotVVM project, and I will be guiding you through this 2 days event. So today we have 3 sessions prepared for you, and tomorrow we will be starting at the same time. I see that there are some questions in the chat right now if this conference will be recorded. Yes, it will be recorded, and in order to prevent some technical issues, we have decided to pre-record some sessions, so I will be presenting live, but my colleagues will be available in the chat during their sessions, so feel free to ask them anything you are interested in the chat. They will be available during their sessions because their sessions were pre-recorded. And of course, if you will have any questions or thoughts, let us know in the chat. So, schedule for today. The first session will be talking about this very short introduction about what is DotVVM, how it works, and how you can use it. In the second session, we will be talking about the model view model approach, which is natural in the DotVVM, and all DotVVM applications are written in the MVVM way. So I will be showing how to deal with model dialogues and multiple sections on one page, and how to nest view models in each other. And then my colleague Roman, he will be talking about progressive web apps, so stay tuned until the end of this day. And tomorrow you can look forward to 4 sessions. The first will be dedicated to the web forms developers who can work with who can use DotVVM to modernize their web forms applications without rewriting everything. Then my colleague Milan will be talking about some advanced features of DotVVM and how you can use static commands to make your web pages more performant. And then we'll be talking about DotVVM controls and how they can help you being more productive. And finally, I will be talking about the future of DotVVM, some features we are planning, and what you can look forward in the future versions of the framework. So let's start. DotVVM is an open source framework that has 2 main goals. The first one is to be able to build web applications using the model view model approach. This approach is kind of familiar to desktop developers if you have been using WPF, or if you have been using Silverlight or Xamarin Forms. You probably know MVVM, and if you like this way of building applications, you can use DotVVM for web. The other scenario, which evolved quite recently, is that DotVVM can be used to modernize old ASP.NET applications, because DotVVM is supported on both .NET Framework and .NET Core. So you can use DotVVM with the .NET Framework, and you can use it as a migration bridge to .NET Core. So it can be a thing that will help you to get rid of old web forms and go to .NET Core. So if you are interested in this scenario, make sure to join us tomorrow at this time, because I will be talking about this in more details. So DotVVM is an open source framework for web UI, which means it's a presentation framework, so it helps you to manipulate with the contents of web pages, and it does all the presentation logic that you will probably need in your web development scenarios. We have become a member of the .NET Foundation, which is an organization that helps to many open source projects that are crucial to the .NET ecosystem. So there are a lot of projects in this foundation, and we are proud to be part of this organization. And the .vvm is supported on both ASP.NET Core, which is the new platform that Microsoft is pushing forward, and also to the ASP.NET Classic. So if you are still using .NET Framework 4.5, 4.6 or something like that, you can still use .vvm, and there are practically no limitations. Yeah, .vvm can integrate into both these platforms. And there is an extension for Visual Studio because .vvm has its own syntax based on HTML, and to be able to have IntelliSense and syntax highlighting and all those features you will need to build web apps in .vvm, we have an extension for Visual Studio 2019 and 2017. So it's available and you can use it. It will help you work with .vvm. We also have a very simple extension for VS Code. It allows it ships only with a few features, so it won't be so comfortable as with the full Visual Studio. But if you are interested in using .vvm in VS Code, let us know, and if we see there is a larger demand for it, we can invest in this area a little bit more. So how to build new web apps with .vvm? As I mentioned, .vvm is using the model view model approach, which you may know from the WPF or Xamarin. And basically, we have used just C# and HTML, so you can use these languages, and you do not need to know JavaScript pretty much. Of course, if you know JavaScript, if you can use NPM and all those tools, it's better because you will be able to do more. If you need to extend .vvm or integrate with third-party controls, you will have to write some JavaScript. But to use the framework itself, you don't need to know almost anything about JavaScript, so there's not a huge barrier for starting with .vvm, because you don't need to learn new language and new platform, new tools and everything. It's for .NET developers, it can be easier than Angular or React, because it's not only about learning JavaScript language, it's also about learning all the libraries, all the tooling, all the things, and it's tough. It will take a few months. Yeah. So in .vvm, we have the views, which are basically HTML files. They have a special extension, .html, and it's basically HTML with a few syntax flavors. So there are, for example, data binding expressions, which are being used in the MVVM, and there are also components, which are also a natural part of .vvm, and some other flavors. Then we have the view model, and basically it's a C# class, so you can write your application logic in C#. You can use all the comfort you have in the Visual Studio, so for example the debugger, IntelliSense, refactoring, sharper, everything you will have. And it will be strongly typed because .vvm as itself is designed to be strongly typed, so you will have syntax checking in the data binding expressions, and it can prevent quite a lot of mistakes and typos. .vvm ships with a few built-in components. Actually, maybe few is not the correct word, because there are more than 25 of them. And we have very simple controls that just wrap some basic HTML elements like text box or button and things like that. And we also come with the advanced controls like grid view, which will be able to present your data, including sorting and paging and those features you will probably need. We have repeater, we have file uploading component, and there are plenty of them, and you will see I will be showing them in a few minutes. So .vvm integrates seamlessly with ASP.NET ecosystem. So no matter if you are using ASP.NET Core or if you are using classic ASP.NET, .vvm is trying to use as many things from the underlying platforms as possible, which means that, for example, DotVVM doesn't handle authentication by itself. It relies on the authentication mechanisms shipped with ASP.NET Core or with Owin. So if Microsoft creates a new way of integrating, for example, with Azure Active Directory, it doesn't matter if .vvm and how .vvm supports it, because it's supported by ASP.NET Core, and we will just use what's available in ASP.NET Core. So you don't need to worry about that you will be missing some great ASP.NET Core features. If ASP.NET Core gets some feature, it's very probable that .vvm will get it right away. And the same applies to Owin, except for the fact that Owin will probably not get many new features, because right now all the focus is on ASP.NET Core. But we support it. And thanks to the integration into these ecosystems, we can also coexist with other frameworks in the same application, in the same process. And you have probably used this feature at some point of time. For example, if you have been using ASP.NET MVC with SignalR, this is an example how two frameworks can live in the same application. They are sharing the authentication information about current user, current culture, localization, and all those things. And .vvm is just one of these technologies. So basically you just install a NuGet package and add .vvm in the request pipeline, and it will fit into the ecosystem. I mentioned modernizing old web apps. I will be talking about this tomorrow, but the problem of ASP.NET Web Forms, which are still quite heavily used, is that it's not supported on .NET Core. So you need to stay at .NET Framework, and you cannot use the new features that came with .NET Core, like faster compile times, better NuGet dependency handlings, and there are a lot of improvements. And with web forms, you're kind of stuck. So .vvm allows you to start replacing ASPX pages one by one. Because if you want to go to .NET Core, you have to get rid of web forms. There's no way how you could use web forms on .NET Core. So you need to replace these ASPX pages with something else. And if you choose .vvm as a replacement, the good thing is that .vvm is supported on both .NET Framework and .NET Core, so and can coexist with web forms in the same application. So you can basically take one page by another and just replace them one by one. And the application is still working, it can still be deployed, you can still fix issues in the web forms parts, you can create new areas in .vvm or in web forms if you want to, and it will still work as one application. And if you use the similar CSS, the user might even not notice that he is in the different technology, because it will look the same way. And the greatest thing is that you don't need to touch your business layer, you can keep it as is. So you will have to rewrite something, but not everything. A lot of code can stay as is, because you are still in .NET and you are only replacing the front-end part of the application. And when you get rid of all web forms dependencies, which means you cannot use the system WebAssembly anywhere, so you have to replace all those things, but the rest can stay as is. So you can then just switch to .NET Core, because .vvm syntax is the same on .NET Framework and .NET Core. So more about this tomorrow, I promise. And how to start with .vvm is very easy. You can just go to .vvm.com/install and download an extension for Visual Studio, or you can do it from Visual Studio itself. There is the tools, extensions, and you can search for them. And if you write .vvm, it will give you the extension. So that's it. We are using the Visual Studio Marketplace, the official distribution channel for extensions. And then you can just use File New Project and search for .vvm project templates, and you will be able to create a new .vvm application. So let's do this. I will now switch in the Visual Studio, and I will create a new project. And if you search for .vvm, you have 3 project templates here. The first is for .NET Core, So this is the one you will probably want to use for the new web apps. We support the newest version of .NET Core. Or if you want to try it on .NET Framework, you can just use this OWIN on .NET Framework. There is also an ASP.NET Core on .NET Framework, but this template will be deprecated because ASP.NET Core is not supported on .NET Framework anymore. The newest versions of ASP.NET Core don't work with the old .NET Framework. So I will be using this .NET Core version, and let's create .VVM app, for example, and I will let .VVM create the default project. Here I have some configuration options what to add in the default project template, but I will say just create project with the default settings. And that's it. We have the project. So let's look what's inside. If first I can open the CS Proj, so you can see this is a normal classic ASP.NET Core application, and you can see I'm running on .NET Core app 3.1, so it's the latest version of .NET Core. And this is just including .vvm files because we have some special extensions, .html, dot master, and dot control. And that's it. And I have one reference to a NuGet package .vvm.asp.NET Core. Just one NuGet package. So let's close it. And the program CS, it's just normal program CS, which you would find in any ASP.NET Core application. And there is the startup file, which is the initial configuration of .vvm. So in the first method, in the configure services, I'm just registering .vvm services, so services at .vvm. And here, the ASP.NET Core request pipeline is configured, and I'm just calling app use.vvm. So this plugs into the default request pipeline quite nicely. And if I would like to combine this with MVC, I could just say app use MVC or something like that, or use SignalR or anything like that. So it can live quite easily with other frameworks in the application. And you may notice that I'm using here some type .vvm startup. And if I open this class, this is the configuration of the .vvm itself. Because .vvm can use multiple pages, you can use some user controls, you can include some resources in the page like scripts or styles and things like that. So everything like that is configured here. Right now I have just added one route. That's the default route for the root URL of the website, and it points to the file views/default .html. Yeah, so this is still pretty easy. That's just the routing configuration. Okay. Now let's look in the view models and views folder. I have a default.html page, which is basically an HTML file. You can see some HTML syntax. And here is default view model, which is a C# class. Then I have a master page, which is basically a global template for my application. So if I look into master page, you can see there is standard HTML structure, like the HTML head, body, and things like that. And this content placeholder, this is a control which just says, okay, let's place the main content of the page here on this place. So here I have just the h1, this header, and it will be substituted to this place. So when .vvm will render this page, you will basically get this HTML with the h1 element right here. And this thing you can see here, it's a data binding, and you may have seen the title property in the view model. So I can set the title property to some value and then print it out in the page. Yeah, so that's how it works. And let's make a simple calculator. So I will remove this content. And first, how would the calculator work? I will use two text box controls. So the user can enter two numbers, the first one and the second one. And then I will add a button. And when the user clicks the button, I will display the result of the operation, so I will just add those numbers together. So in MVVM, you need properties to persist the state of the user controls. So the state of the page are basically those three numbers: the first number, the second number, and the result of the operation. So let's declare three properties. So I will just create prop int number 1, prop int number 2, and a result. Yeah. So let's now go to the view and let's create the user interface. So I will create some title, simple calculator, and let's create the text boxes. And now in classic HTML, you would be using input type text, but in DotVVM we have components that support data binding. So I will use .textbox, .textbox, and as a text property, I will use the value binding. So I can say number 1. And as you can see, the Visual Studio extension is giving me IntelliSense for that. Yeah. So let's create a second text box, and I will bind it to number 2 and equals, and I will print out the result. And you may notice that here, for printing out values, I need to use double curly braces, not just single like here, because single curly braces can have special meaning in scripts or style elements in the page, so that's why we decided to use double curly braces. But in the attributes, it's pretty useless, so you can put double curly braces here, but you don't have to, so I'm keeping the simpler variant of this. Okay, let's create a button. And when the user clicks the button, I will add those numbers together. And now I am not binding to a value from the view model, but I want to call some command in the view model. So I will call function called calculate. And it's not declared in the view model, so I don't get IntelliSense for that, but it doesn't matter. Calculate, because I can have this function generated. So I can use control dot, and .vvm allows me to generate either async version or the synchronous version of this method. I will use the synchronous one because it's just an in-memory operation. There's no await needed. Yeah. And now I can just update the state of my view model. So I can say result equals number 1 plus number 2. And when the user clicks the button, this function will get called, it will update the view model, and the changes in the view model will be written to the page. Yeah? So that's it. So let's look again at this markup. So I have text box control that's bound to number 1, second text box that's bound to number 2, and I'm printing out the result. And there is a button that calls the calculate method. It should work. Let's run it. So I have pressed Ctrl F5. I could press F5, which would attach the debugger, but I'm used to use debugger only when I really need it. So right now I have the simple calculator. You can see 2 text boxes and a button. So let's, for example, ask how much is 5 plus 10. And when I click the calculate button, you can see the result. Yeah, so the calculate method was called, and we got the result. Okay, let's put breakpoint here, and let's run the application again, this time with the debugger. So a new window should open, hopefully. Okay. And notice the first request in ASP.NET, it's always a little bit slower, but the next one should be really fast. This is just the startup of the framework and everything. Okay, so we are here. So let's use 1 plus 2. And when I click calculate, I should get the breakpoint. So I have the full debugging experience because I'm just using C#. This is not a matter of the .vvm extension. That's because the view models are written in C#. So it's very easy to debug, and you can stay with the tools you already know. Okay, so let's continue, and we will get the result. And maybe just one thing, in ASP.NET Web Forms, the page would do a full reload. Also, if you would be using, for example, Razor Pages, if you don't do anything special, it will do a classic HTTP post. So you will just post all the data and get the entire new page. .vvm is using AJAX, and it only sends just JSON representation of the view model to the server and back. So there are no reloads of this page. I'm still on the same page. Just .vvm is just updating pieces of the UI which have changed. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. .html files are translated to plain HTML because the browser, of course, doesn't know what dot text box means. So .vvm has to translate this into the HTML equivalents. So it will produce input type text with some Knockout.js expressions. C# view models have to be serialized to JSON so they can be available in the browser. And it will also, when you update the view model on the client side, then everything is recalculated without calling the server. I haven't demonstrated this, but if you would write number 1 plus number 2 here, then this expression would be translated to JavaScript, so it would happen on the client side. Yeah, and that's a nice thing because there are a lot of things you can do in this way. For example, if I would want to create a checkbox and bind its value to enabled property of this text box, it would just work because the MVVM experience will work on the client side as well. Yeah, so that's not just about calling the server for everything. Okay, and MVVM uses Knockout.js library, which has been really popular a few years ago, and right now there are other frameworks. Vue is using a kind of similar approach than Ask Knockout, so we are still using Knockout, but maybe in the future .vvm can switch to other framework. Right now we are still quite happy with Knockout, and it's quite easy to use either from the JavaScript. So here is a short animation how the communication works. So the ASP.NET is running on the server. .vvm is just a middleware for ASP.NET. And when the user loads the page, so the ASP.NET will get just a standard HTTP GET request. So that's what happens when you press F5, or if we just reload the site. Oh, I have stopped the debugger, so I need to start the app again. Yeah, but in this case, the browser just sends HTTP GET to the server. Yeah. The server creates an instance of the view model, so it will create new calculator view model or something like that. Then it will process the dot HTML file, so it will look for all the components and generate Knockout.js equivalents of these components, and it will serialize the view model and embed it in the HTML. Yeah, so it will send the HTML and the view model on the same request in one response. Yeah. Let's look how it works. If I view the source code of the page, you can see that it's quite clean HTML. We are including some scripts, and those text boxes have been transformed to input type text with data bind, which is a Knockout.js feature. It's an attribute where Knockout.js is looking for controls with these attributes, and it will bind the number 1 to the text box. We have our own binding handler, but basically whatever appears in this property in the view model will get to the text box, and when the user changes the value in the text box, it will be written back to the view model property on the client. Then the result, printing out the result, it's done by Knockout like this, so it will generate some Knockout command, and Knockout will replace this command with the actual value of this property. And the button was translated to input type button, and we are calling some short script that will take the view model and send it to the server, execute the calculate function, and apply the changes to the page. Here are some another scripts. These were just preloads of the script, so this didn't actually include the script in the page. This is including the scripts. And there is a hidden field with the view model. You can see there is number 1, number 2, and result. There are some validation metadata which we need in order to make sure that it will be integer. And there is the cross-site request forgery token. It's a security feature that prevents some kinds of web attacks. And basically that's it. This is the end of the page. This is how we initialize .vvm, which will change, by the way, in the future versions. Yeah. So basically we are getting HTML and the view model in one request. The hidden field is here because if the user goes away from this page and then returns back, in most browsers the values of the hidden fields are persisted, so the user will return to the same state as he or she left the page. Yeah. So that's how it works. And when the user clicks the button, then it's a little bit complicated because we are not doing classic HTTP post, we are doing HTTP AJAX post. And basically we just take the view model and send it to the server. So if the view model is small, it's just a few hundreds of bytes or something like that, because it's just the values of the properties. And again, on the server, .vvm will create instance of the view model. Then it will populate the client JSON in the view model. So it will just set the numbers to the values from the client. Then we will call the calculate method. So the result will be calculated from the values the client has given to us. And finally, we will serialize the new view model and return it back to the client. And because we know what we got from the client, we are only sending the diff view model. So we just send the properties that have actually changed in order to save the network traffic. We want to transfer as less data as possible. And when this response gets to the client, the Knockout.js will just update the particular elements in the page. So only those things that have actually changed will be changed. So there are no full reloads of the page or nothing like that. It's done. And you didn't need to write a single line of JavaScript to be able to do this, because .vvm itself is written in JavaScript, so we had to write a lot of JavaScript, but you don't need to write any JavaScript, just HTML and C#. Okay, what controls you can find in .vvm? We have wrappers for the form controls, which are available in HTML. So we have text box, checkbox, radio button, combo box, file upload. We have buttons, we have button and link button. The difference is that the first is the real actual button. The second is a hyperlink that behaves like a button. So if you click on it, it won't navigate to another page. It will just call a command on the server. Sometimes you just need a link that will behave like a button. Then we have data controls, for example, a repeater, grid view, list view, and other things. They support data binding, so if you put a collection in your view model, then you can bind those controls to the collection, and they will render their content based on the items in the collection. We also have other controls with special meanings, for example, the content placeholder and content to create compositions like that the page is embedded in other page. We also have SPA content placeholder, which is a similar control that will create a single page app. We also have authenticated view and role view, which are all special controls that will allow you to display different content to users who are signed in and to anonymous users and things like that. And .vvm also part of these controls. There are a lot of features because .vvm is a fully mature framework that you can use for building a line of business applications. So there are features you would expect in these kind of applications. So as I said, the master pages also support SPA, single page apps, and creating a single page app in .vvm is as easy as changing content placeholder to SPA content placeholder. There can be only one SPA content placeholder in the page, but if you use it, and then if I would create a link to other page, it wouldn't be a normal link. .vvm will change the link and it would just reload the inner content of the page, so the master page will stay loaded and it just dynamically change the contents of this content placeholder. Okay, there is routing, and it's for generating links. You can register your routes in the application. It's very similar to MVC routing or also web form set routing, so it's very similar. And then there is the routing control, which you can use for building links to other pages. It's much better to build your links based on route names than just building your URLs by yourself, because if you decide to change the URL, you would have to go through the entire application and change it on all places. Here, it will just build the URL based on its route registration. So I will say the route name equals this. And if you want to specify some parameters, you can say param dash and name of the parameter in the route, and you can use either hard-coded value or a data binding. Yeah, so you can bind those parameters, and .vvm will build the URL quickly. Localization, of course, because a lot of line of business applications need to be localized to multiple languages, and in .NET we have resource files, so the easiest way is to use a special kind of binding which is called resource binding, and you can just point it to a resource file and some key. You can use this binding to other things, and there will be a session about it tomorrow. Milan will be showing how to use resource bindings to optimize some things up. But the original intent of this binding was to provide a way to bind to resource items. So this is how you can do the localization. We also support date and number formatting the same way as .NET is supporting it. So you can use, for example, the format string property on a text box, and it will do all the formatting for you. And the format strings are exactly the same like those you know from .NET, so it's the same. We just had to re-implement them in JavaScript. Validation is also using a lot of features you know from .NET Framework, so you can mark your view model properties with the required attribute or any other data annotations attribute, and .vvm will help you with validating this, so it will make sure those conditions are satisfied. There is also support for iValidatable object interface, so if the view model will implement this interface, .vvm will evaluate the validate method and it will just use all the results for the validation purposes. And there is also model state, which you can use typically if you have more advanced validation scenarios, like for example you want to register a new user and you want to make sure that the user is not already registered. So you will look in the database, and if the email address is already been used, you can just report your validation error in the model state, and .vvm will display it like it's any other kind of validation error. I will be showing validation in the next session, so stay tuned and you will see it in a few minutes. We have also validation controls. There is the validation summary, which will list all your validation errors at one place. And we also have a validator control. We can also attach CSS classes to elements that are not valid. If you use Bootstrap, for example, there is a CSS class called hasError. And if you add this CSS class to some element, it will be, the contents of it will be displayed in a red color and they will be highlighted like they are invalid. So it's very easy to do this with .vvm. We can dynamically attach and detach these classes based on the current validation state. We can also display the error messages, set tooltips and things like that. And .vvm consists of the free products, which is the .vvm framework, which is open source, is member of .NET Foundation, and it's being developed on GitHub. And everything I have been talking about so far is available in this open source framework, so you don't need to worry about some limitations. The framework itself is open source. There is also a free extension for Visual Studio, so if you go to marketplace.visualstudio.com and download .vvm extension, you can use it to build your .vvm applications. We are working on .vvm for more than 5 years, and it takes a lot of time, and we need to make up some money for the bread we need to eat in order to produce more code. So we also have commercial products. You can use them to save your time. Nothing in these products is essential. You can use .vvm without paying anything, but if you decide to use .vvm for some more advanced application, there's a high chance that these products will save your time. We have Bootstrap for .vvm, which allows you to use Bootstrap more easily. So if I really like Bootstrap because I don't have any graphical skills, and in Bootstrap everything looks quite nice, so I'm just composing my applications from various Bootstrap widgets. But every time I need to use model dialog or more complicated widgets, I need to go to the documentation and copy paste all those divs with those CSS classes and things like that, and I don't remember anything. And Bootstrap for .vvm, there is a control, yes, model dialog, which will just render this crazy long piece of code for me. So it just saves your time. Of course, you can use Bootstrap with .vvm without purchasing this package, but you will have to copy paste this code from the documentation. This will help you to generate it using a shorter syntax. There is also .vvm Business Pack, which can be useful for more complicated line of business applications. If you need advanced grid view with more features, if you need the advanced form controls like datetime picker, color picker, autocomplete, and multi-select, and all those things, they are available in .vvm Business Pack. And we have also a commercial version of the Visual Studio extension, which has more features than the free version. Even the free version has a lot of them. There are the project templates, so you can create file new project.vvm. It will work in the free version. In the free version, there is also IntelliSense for .vvm controls, so .textbox, you will have IntelliSense for this. You will have IntelliSense for control properties and things like that. The only thing there where you won't have IntelliSense is the view model. So if you just want to use the IntelliSense on the view model, you need the commercial version. Or you can ask for a trial on our website. So if you register on .vvm.com, you can ask for a 30 days trial. And if you will need more time to test everything, if it works for your scenarios, let us know and we can extend the trial for a longer time. Yeah, and you can live without this extension. It just saves your time. It just makes you more productive. But the framework is not limited. So all the features of the framework will work even without this extension. So there is IntelliSense. It's not 100% feature complete. If you need more, you can purchase this package. Okay, so here are some links. So if you are interested in .vvm, go to .vvm.com. There is also a link to our GitHub repo. If you want to start working with .vvm, visit our docs site, .vvm.com/docs. And if you are interested in looking at the source code of .vvm, here is a URL of our GitHub repository. If you will have any questions or thoughts or ideas, post an issue. We will be happy to talk with you. So to recap, .vvm can be used to build new web apps using MVVM approach. So if you like MVVM from your previous desktop development projects, I think that .vvm will be very easy for you to start, because if you have been using WPF or Xamarin or technologies like this, even the control names are similar. We have grid view, we have text box, we have a lot of controls you are probably familiar with. And the view models are written in C#, so it's very easy to use. You can use debugger, you can use all the things you are used to from Visual Studio. If you are interested in modernizing web forms applications, again, join us tomorrow at the same time at 4 p.m. Central Europe or 2 p.m. UTC, and you will see some demos of how to transition from web forms to .vvm and then to .NET Core. If you have any questions, feel free to ask us in the chat. I will be here during the break, and after the break I will be continuing showing how to use MVVM in .vvm. We will look at some more advanced examples. I will show you how to build a data grid, how to create a master detail view, basically a CRUD, and how to use model dialogues in .vvm. And I will also show some best practices, how to keep your view models clean and how to structure them so the application wouldn't be messy. So thank you for joining us, and stay tuned, because in 10 minutes or something like that we will continue with the next session. Hello again, welcome to DotVVM Virtual Conference. Welcome to the second session. This time I will be talking about the MVVM pattern and how you should write your view models to in complicated applications. So let's start right now. So first maybe I should explain what exactly model view model is and what all the words in this complicated term mean. So for maybe the most problematic part is the model, because in every book you can find different definitions of this term, but I understand model as business layer API. It doesn't mean to be API, a real API. It's just what the business layer gives to you, and not only the functionality, also the data models. So if you get information about customer, it's also what fields are included with this object. So for me, the model is basically what the business layer gives me and what accepts from me when I need to do something. Yeah, so something like this. Then there is the view. So in case of .vvm, there is just the .dot.html file. We also support the master pages, and we also support user control. So there are also other extensions that should be also considered as a view. So dot master and dot control. Yeah. But the syntax in all those files is pretty much the same. The extension is only to distinguish between kinds of the views. And the view model in case of .vvm is just a C# class, which shouldn't contain business logic. It should contain the presentation logic. So for example, saving and loading the customers from the database, it's not a matter of the view models, because view model is a part of the presentation layer. This logic should be somewhere else in some service or facade or repository or something like that. And the view model should only say, okay, I need information about customer, somebody give them to me. Yeah, so it's very important not to place business logic in basically in the presentation layer, because this also prevents the application from being extended, and it creates basically technological debt, and it's difficult to, for example, upgrade to newer platforms or to change the front end for something else, because you are not only rewriting front end, you also need to rewrite or remove out the business logic. The view model in in .vvm has several responsibilities. The most important is to represent the state of the user interface. So you have seen this in the previous session where I had the calculator, and we needed to represent those numbers that were entered by the user in the view model. So for every piece of information that is dynamic in the page and that somebody, not only the user, even somebody else, can change, everything like that has to be represented in the view model, and it should be public properties. It's important for .vvm that these properties are public, and it have to be properties, not fields. Then the second responsibility of the view model is to handle the user commands. So whenever the user does something with the page, or whenever the user orders some action to be done, the view model is the guy who will receive this event and who is responsible for handling it. So when you click the button, a method in the view model is called. So for handling commands, you should use public methods in the view model, and .vvm supports both synchronous or asynchronous methods. So the method can be void or it can be async task. Maybe the async is not necessary, I just wanted to emphasize that it's asynchronous. So if the method returns a task, .vvm will await this task. Also, an optional thing that the view model can do is the navigation between the pages. View model can redirect the user to another page or to another route, to be precise. You don't need to use this sometimes because you are still in the HTML, so you can create a hyperlink to another page. And I was also showing the route link control. So these controls can basically bypass the view model. You can go from one view directly to another view. But if you, for example, want to save the data and then send the user somewhere, you can use redirect, and in this case the view model will handle the navigation throughout the application. So it's an optional feature, but it's there and you can use it. And I already explained how .vvm works, and I said that .vvm takes the view model and serializes it and sends it to the browser. So the condition for view model in .vvm is that it must be JSON serializable. Yeah. And also the state must be part of this JSON. That's why we require public properties. If it's not a public property, if it's, for example, a private variable or private field in the view model, it wouldn't be included in the JSON, so the state information would be lost. That's why you need to use public properties, and for commands we are using public methods. So that's it. And the view model on the server, there are some methods in the view model that can be called, and they are called in this order. So first we have the init method, which is called right after the view model is created. Yeah. And in the previous animation, there was that if you send a post back, so if you click a button, the .vvm will take the view model, serialize it in JSON, and send it to the server. Then we just first create a new empty view model, and then we take the JSON and populate the view model with the JSON. And it's after the init method. So in init, you typically want to load static information, non-changing data, something like, I don't know, list of countries, a list of currencies, or some constants, or some application settings and things like that. Things that never change, because you don't have the current information, the current state from the user. This state is available in the load method. So in load method, you have the view model in a consistent form. It's in exact state as the user is seeing it right now on the post back. And then the method which user choose to be called will be invoked. So the calculate method would be invoked after the load event. And then there is the pre-render event, which is the one you will be overriding most of the time, because it's done after the user command. And typically in this method, you want to request new data from the database and fill, for example, the grid view or something like that. It's important to do it after the command, because if the command is, for example, creating or deleting some data, if you would do the select before the command, you wouldn't get the most current results. Yeah, so that's why you should do most of the database work in the pre-render. Yeah, so this naming is taken from web forms. We wanted to keep it similar to web forms, but the load, do not load data in load. Load the data in pre-render. I know it's a little bit confusing, but if you have been working with web forms, you probably know the reasons why it's not a good idea to load the data in load. I will show you a short example of how to do the most frequent requirement, which is a CRUD page. So a page where you can create, read, update, and delete your records. In .vvm, there is the grid view control, which supports sorting and paging, and it doesn't support filtering right away, but it's very easy to add it, so you will see how to do it. And you can use the classic collections like lists or array with the grid view, but you would need to handle the sorting and paging by yourself. That's why .vvm includes a class which is called grid view dataset, and this class is basically a collection with some metadata about sorting and paging. So it's a collection which also remembers on which page you are and by which field you are sorting, for example. There are some other features to the grid view dataset, but these two are the most frequently used. And the grid view dataset, it has also support for iQueryable. So if you are using, for example, Entity Framework, it's loading the data in the grid view dataset is very easy. There is just one method called dataset load from queryable, and you will give queryable to the dataset, and it will do all the loading for you. If you don't use Entity Framework, or if you want to use any other way of getting data, you can also fill the dataset manually. It supports both scenarios, so it's up to you if you want to use Entity Framework or if you want to load the dataset manually. Also, there is a very important feature in DotVVM which you can take advantage of, and it's a data context property. In the previous session, you have seen that you can use the value binding to read and write values from the view model. So you can bind the text box text property to some property in the view model, and the data binding works in both ways. So whenever the value is changed in the view model, the text box will be updated, and whenever the user enters something in the text box, it will be written to the view model. So by default, this binding is two-way. And if the view model is more complicated, you probably don't want to have 20 properties in the view model, so you can use nesting. And if you nest one view model into the other, you can use the data context, so all your bindings would be evaluated not to the root view model of the page, but only to some specific part of the view model, basically to some view model child. Yeah, so this is how you can restrict some part of the page to work only with some part of the view model. And if you use this correctly, it's a great thing because it can make your markup much more concise. So let's look how it works. I will run the application first. I have a Northwind SQLite database, so it's very easy to start. You don't need to configure a SQL server or anything like that. You can just get the source code and run the project. And I'm using Bootstrap, so this looks nice. If I would do my own design, it would look very ugly, I promise. So this is a grid view control, which is just using a few Bootstrap classes, so it would look nice. By default, DotVVM just produce a raw HTML table, and you have to provide your own CSS to make it look like a table. But Bootstrap is doing a great job in this. And you can see there is a one page of records. There are 15 rows, and you can use the paging. So I'm clicking through all the pages, and there is sorting, so I can sort. And because I'm using iQueryable, so the database is not queried for all the pages, so I'm not loading million records from the database. I'm just loading the current page because the dataset can add these paging and sorting information right in the iQueryable query. So if you use Entity Framework, it would be very efficient. You will just load these records. There are a lot of technologies that need to load the entire table and then doing the paging on the client side, but in DotVVM this is done for you, so it's very efficient. Okay. And if you look in this page, it's quite easy. We have the grid view control, which is bound to a product, and I will show the view model in a few seconds. And I'm using the Bootstrap CSS classes, so this is table striped. That's why the table looks like this. And I have a definition of all my columns. The first column, it contains links to the product detail page. So if you click on it, you will go to the product/17, and this URL is generated by the route link. So I have the route name product detail, and I'm supplying a parameter called ID, and you can bind your records or your values to this parameter, and I'm using product name as a text of the link. If I look in the DotVVM startup, you can see that this route is registered like this. So the URL is product/ID in the curly braces, which means that it's a parameter. And it's optional, because if I want to create a new product, I will just say product/ and nothing. And it's going to the same page, which can handle updates and inserts, but it works. Yeah. So this is the template column. I can provide my own content for the table cell. And then there are just text columns which can just render some value. So I'm rendering category name, supplier name, quantities, orders on order, and units on order, and things like that. So these are the text columns. Basically just take the value from the viewModel object and render it as it is. For everything else, I can use the template field, template column. Yeah. And here, this new product button is just a route link. It goes to the same URL, but I'm not specifying the param ID property. So it will just use empty ID, which means that it will go to just /product. Okay? So the parameters is optional. So in this case, it's not supplied. And there is the data pager, which is doing all the paging. So if you just bind it to the same collection as grid view, it will do the paging over this collection. So let's look in the view model. I have a property called products, and it's of type grid view dataset of product list model. Product list model, let me show it to you, is just a plain C# class, and it contains all the columns I will be displaying in the grid view. This class is specific to this page. If I would display some other products elsewhere in the application, there is a high chance that I would need to display different columns. So it's a good idea to create a model object for every page, because it's much more efficient when there are only the fields you really need in the page. Because, as I mentioned earlier, the view model is serialized in JSON. So if I would place there 100 columns and I was using only 10 of them, then it means that I would transfer a lot of unnecessary data to the client. So it's a good idea to not pollute view models and model objects with data you actually don't need. Yeah, so that's just a best practice. And so this is the grid view dataset of product list model, and I can specify some configuration to it. So there are paging options, and I'm saying page size, and there are also sorting options. There is a sort expression. I want to sort by product name. I'm using this fancy C# name of operator. There is also sort descending, or yeah, so if I would set it to true, it would sort in reverse order. And so that's my data set. And if you want to work with the data set, it's quite easy, because in the pre-render method, which is used for querying the database, I am asking, is refresh required? Data set has this Boolean flag that indicates whether you need to refresh your data or not. Because if you don't change anything in the data set, there's no need to query the database over and over. And on the first request, this will be true, and when I load it, it will reset to false. If I change, for example, the filters, or if I choose different page or change the order, this would get set to true automatically. So it's a good thing to check on this flag before you do the loading, because otherwise you would be loading unnecessary, you would ask the database even if it's not necessary. So I have my product service, which is my business layer, or maybe some just service class or something like that. If you look in this, I'm asking for this class in the constructor. So I'm using dependency injection. It works pretty naturally in .vvm. And enable to use the product service like this, you just need to register it in the startup. So the same way as I register .vvm and entity framework and these things, I can also register my application services. So this is my product service, and I'm registering it as scoped, which means that I will get a separate instance for every HTTP request. Yeah. So I will get the instance of product service in the constructor, and I'm storing it in a read-only field. And this is also quite clever advantage of knowing how .vvm works, because the view model is serialized into JSON, and this is a service class. I don't need it on the client. There's no way how it could work. It only provides some functions. but I don't want it to be a part of the view model on the client. So I declare it intentionally as a field. Yeah, so everything you will need on the client, make a public property. Everything you don't want to give to the client, make it as a private field, and you should be safe. So all these dependencies I get from the constructor, I declare as read-only fields. And it doesn't have to be read-only, but it has to be a field. And I'm asking for getProducts query, and I'm passing a filter, which is another model class, and I'm just filtering by some text, or I want to show only the available products. So this is this UI. Yeah, so this is the search text, this is the available only. And again, if I would add some filters later, it's practical to have this model object even if there are just two properties, because I will be able to add more filter criteria, and I don't need to change anything else in my view model because I'm just passing one object. This getProducts query, it's just using entity framework, so I'm asking for Northwind context in the constructor, and then I'm going to the products collection, products table, and applying the filters. If it's available, I will just use where units in stock is greater than 0. I'm using the EF functions like for filtering by some search text. So if I enter some text for searching, it would work. And then I'm projecting the model objects from the product. So I'm not passing entity framework entities to the view model. I don't like to do it because they can be much more columns than I actually need in the view model. So that's why I'm creating my own model objects. So I'm using select and asking for those data. And for example, this is useful because I can just ask for category name and entity framework will produce the join for me. So I don't need to include the entire category, which also has 20 other columns I don't need. I can just ask for category name and supplier company name. And if you don't like writing so much code, I recommend to use Automapper. Use it carefully because it's a very nice tool, but it can also cause issues if you try to ask for too much of it. But for these simple transform, like from a collection of entities, create a collection of these models, it's a perfect tool and it can save you these lines. You would just say product, project to product list model, and you are done. Yeah. So that's it. And as you can see, I'm not doing any sorting or paging here. I'm just doing filtering, because sorting and paging is handled by the GridView dataset for me. Yeah, so I just get all the records, no matter on which page and by which I'm sorting, and I just say products load from queryable, and it will read the sorting and paging information from the dataset and apply that to the iQueryable before evaluating the query. So if you look at the SQL, which is going to the database, you will see that I'm asking only for the 15 records on the third page sorted by product name, and all those things will happen at the database level. And if you don't use entity framework, you can just manually fill this information in the dataset. There is the items collection, it's normal list, and if you are getting your objects from using any other way, you can just fill this items collection with your objects. Don't forget to set paging options total items count to the total number of records that match the filter criteria, because the data pager control will render the appropriate number of pages. Yeah, so it needs to know the total number of records. Otherwise, it wouldn't know how many these links should be here. And also, you should reset this flag manually because the dataset cannot know that you have tampered with those properties. So after you're done, you can mark that refresh has been done and nobody else needs refresh. Okay, and finally the filtering. I have collapsed this section so it wouldn't scare us at the beginning. But right now I have the Bootstrap well, which is doing this fancy border and background. And I'm using the form, inline version of the form. and I have the search products label and the text box, so I'm searching. And as you can see, there is the data context bound to the filter model. So yeah, I can remind how the filter looks. It's an object in the view model, and it has search text and available only. And thanks to the data context, this says that all data bindings in this form element will be evaluated on the filter, not on the view model of the entire page. Yeah, so this is how you can use data context to restrict the UI to work only with some tiny part of the view model. Yeah, so right now I can say search text and it's bound to the filter, yeah, and also available only. But there is a button, apply filters, which needs to refresh the data, refresh the results that will be displayed in the query. And the apply filter is not in this filter, it's in the parent. It's in the product list view model. So I can use _parent to get away from this scope. So I can get one level up, one data context up. And there is also _root. And because right now I have only two scopes, this filter and the root scope, it will do the same thing. But in a more complicated scenarios, the parent is different than the root. So always decide if you want to use with parent or with root. Because if I would use data context, for example, here, I could break my bindings here. So this is a little decision you need to make. In this case, it doesn't really matter. But if you wrap this into another section with different data context, then it will become important. And again, this is also using the isSubmit button property. This is just a syntax trigger. You can say equals true, but you don't need to specify this. If there is no value to the attribute, it's treated as a true. And if it's submit button, the good thing is that if you are in this controls and press enter, it will just trigger this button. Yeah, so that's why it's submit button, because I can go here, I can say A for example, and press enter. And sorry, I have been changing the application, so let's refresh this. Oh yeah, it takes a little bit time because I have changed some part of the C# code, so it recompiled the application, so that's why it took a few seconds. But I can do it once more. Now the application is loaded, it's living. So I can say AA and press enter, and now it's immediate. So it was just the first request to the application which was slow. Sorry about that. Yeah. And also I can use the only in stock. So for example, now you can see that the data are changing here. Yeah. So that's the grid view. So to recap, we have the grid view dataset, which is basically a clever collection which remembers on which page you are and by which column you are sorting. Knows the page size and things like that. And I have a function that returns me iQueryable of my model objects. So it's iQueryable of product list model. And I'm saying products load from queryable, pass the queryable, and the dataset will do paging and sorting for me. So I don't need to do anything else. In the apply filters, I just say products request refresh, which basically sets this is refresh required to true. And because the pre-render happens after the commands from the buttons, this is also quite a nice way, because this will be called first and then this will be true, so it will do the reload. And again, if there are multiple reasons why you want to do a reload, thanks to the fact that this doesn't do a query in the database, it's just setting the is refresh required to true. So in this case, it's also very efficient, because if there are 5 changes that all need to refresh the data in the grid, it will happen only once if you put this in the pre-render method. Of course, if you would load from queryable here, then if there is something else why you need to refresh the data, it will be on 2 queries. But this pattern is also quite nice, because no matter how many things change in the page, any change can trigger this request refresh, and before I'm rendering the page, I will just load the data, no matter if it's requested once or 10 times, it doesn't matter. Okay, so this is the grid, and I also have a detail page here, I can edit some product. So you can see it's a basic, quite simple Bootstrap form. Thanks to Bootstrap CSS, it looks nice. And so let's look at the markup. First, there is the title, and you can see that some expressions are supported in the value binding. You cannot do everything, but the basic expressions work. Don't try to call functions in the value binding, because there's not many functions which .vvm can translate to JavaScript, because this needs to be translated to JavaScript. If anybody changes this is new to another value, this binding would re-evaluate on the client side. But in this case, this question mark and colon operator is supported. Form data context, and again you can see that in this form we will be binding only to current product, which is again its product detail model. So it's another model object, and I'm binding to this object. If the object is not new, if it's updating current record, then this section will be visible. In .vvm you can add visible to any element, and if you use binding, this section would be shown or hidden based on the value. So if is new is false, in this case the section will be visible. The difference is that if I'm editing, you can see the section is here, and if I would switch to insert, the section disappears because the visible is false. So you can hide or show any part of the page using this. Yeah. Then we have the name, and you can see there is just a text box bound to product name. Product name is a property in the product detail model in the current product. Yeah, so that's just this. I have combo boxes here for picking the category and supplier. Yeah, so for example, you can select a category, you can select suppliers, and this is a little bit complicated, but not so much, hopefully. So the combo box has the data source property, and it's bound to a collection. As you can see from the tooltip, it's a list of category picker model, and if you look here, you can see it's just a list. No need to use grid view dataset here because we are not sorting and paging the list of categories. And there is just a category ID and category name. In the database there are more columns to the category, but again, I don't want to pollute the view model with things I don't need, so I'm having only those two properties I actually need in my model object. Yeah. So that's it. And because this list of categories is never changed on this page, we'll just load it from the database, and there is no way how user can add new categories on this page. There can be some other pages where the user can add categories, but not here. So in this case, I can say bind server to client first request. It means that on the first GET request, this collection will be downloaded to the client, and when the user is doing postbacks, is clicking buttons, the collection will stay on the client. It will not be sent to the server because the server doesn't need it. It can always load it from the database, and there is no need to push these non-changing data then and forth. Yeah, so this is basically optimization of the network transfers. The same applies to suppliers. So these are two collections. And when I go back to the combo box, so I'm binding to the collection, and I need to say that the category name property will be displayed. So that's the labels you can see in this list. Yeah, so that's the category name property. And the item value binding means that when I select some category, its ID will be written to some viewModel property. And this is this category ID viewModel property. And this is a little bit confusing because both bindings look the same. This is category ID, this is category ID, but these data bindings has different data context because combo box is changing the context to the items of this data source. So this is category name of the category picker model, and this is category ID of the product detail model. If you look at the tooltip, you can see then the class in which the property is different. So and it's pretty natural, because of course if you specify the property of the list item, you want the binding to happen on another object than writing the result value. But anyway, in the product detail model, the selected category ID will be written into the category ID of the product detail model, so it will work. Exactly the same situation is with suppliers, so it's the same. Again, it's a combo box control, and selected value is going to the supplier ID property. And then there are some text boxes, so quantity per unit, units in stock, units on order, all of them are just text boxes. And I'm using validation here, so that's what, for example, this control does. It's a validation summary, and basically it will take all the validation errors from this screen, exactly from this validation target, so from underscore this, which is the product detail model. If there is something else in the page that could be validated apart from the current product, it won't be displayed here. So validation target allows you to select the scope of your validation. And then I have the save button and cancel button. Okay, let's try the validation. When I try to create new product and don't fill anything, this is how the validation summary looks like. Basically, it's just rendering an unordered list. Your responsibility is to provide CSS so it would look nice. I have used just the text danger CSS class, which makes everything red. It's enough for me, but of course your graphic people would think that maybe more sophisticated approach is needed for this scenario. And also you may see that I have also changed the text box color to red, and there is also the tooltip. Yeah, the product name field is required. So how this is done? It's first, let's look in the model object. So if I go to the current product and go to product detail model, you can see there is the product ID, and all those other fields are marked with the required attribute. It's from system component model data annotations. So it's a standard .NET framework way of validating things. And basically I'm using the required validation here, and also for the numbers I'm also using the range validation, so it should be from 0 to 999. Yeah. So this is the validation rules, and .VVM by default on every button it checks for all validation errors. So if there is the button and I click on the save method wouldn't even be called if there is any validation error in the page. So by default, the validation is turned on. You can turn it off, so you can say validation enabled equals false, or you can say validation target and say, okay, I will be validating, but not the entire page. I will only validate some part of the page. For example, this, which is the current product, because I'm still in this data context. Yeah, I'm still in the current product. Yeah, so this is what I can do. There is nothing else in the view model apart of this current product, so it doesn't matter if the validation target is actually here but not, but you can use validation target to validate only some part of the page. And if I would not use route link for canceling, because I don't need to do anything in cancel, I just want to go to the previous page, so this is route link. But if it's a button, there it would make sense to do validation enabled equals false, because if you cancel and not saving anything, you don't need to ask the user to make all the values in the form really valid. So this is how the validation is triggered. When you click the save button, by default entire page is going to be validated. So that's why this validation summary will trigger. And also there is a way for .VVM to mark some elements or assign some properties to some elements and do some actions when the validation error appear. So for example, this div around the text box has the validator value set to product name. So if this field is not valid, then this div element is marked and some action will happen. And there is a way to configure these actions. So for example, I can say validator.invalid CSS class has error, which means that if this property is an invalid, this div will get this has error CSS class. DotVVM will just add this class using JavaScript to this element. And also I can say validator.setTooltip text to true, which means that the div will get this tooltip when you hover the mouse on it. Okay. But of course, all the fields will have the same validation rules, so it would be quite stupid to repeat those two features on every form field, because this is a very simple page, but there are 6 form fields, and I really don't want to write this everywhere. So in .vvm, some properties like these validation things can be specified not on the element itself, but they can be specified on their parents. So I could set them to this form group, or I could set them to this entire form, and it would apply to all elements which have validator value set. Or because I want the entire application to look consistent, I have just specified these properties here in the master page on the body element. So basically this is set up globally. So whenever I assign validator.value to any element, it will take this behavior from master page. So it will get the has error CSS class and it will set the tooltip text. Right. So this is how you can display the validation. And if you would like to display a validation message, for example, you can also use .validator control, and you can say just the value equals property to be validated. So this is the product ID, and show error message text equals true, which will grab the validation error and display it here. And of course you can say you can use a CSS class, so it will be CSS class will be text danger and the validation message will be red. Yeah, so this is how you would display this error message for this field. But I don't want to do that because I have validation summary here at the bottom of the form. So this is sufficient for me. And when you click the save, you just you can see that I am not doing any kind of business logic in the view model. I'm just saying product service save and let the business layer to do all the things. I'm just giving it my detail model. And on the pre-render, if it's first page load, which means that context is postback is false, I'm filling the categories and suppliers fields, so the combo boxes will have their data sources populated. And then if it's new record, I'm just initializing the model to a new instance, so there is just empty model with empty fields. And if it's an existing product, I'm using the ID property and to load the information, and the ID is marked with the from route attribute, which means that .vvm will look in the route for the ID parameter, and if it's there, it will set it to this property. So I will be able to find the ID in this property. And the isNew property is just a read-only one, so you can see this expression body syntax here. And basically, if ID is 0, which means that there was nothing in the route, then it's a new record. If it's non-zero, it means that it's not a new record. It means that I'm editing some of the records. Okay, so this is how it works, and that's how I can create a detail page in .vvm. Okay. One important thing, if you will start with .vvm, you can very soon run into the situation that the view model is quite long because it's doing a lot of things. Yeah, if the page is complicated, you can have a lot of properties and a lot of methods in your view models. The key rule is to keep the view models simple and sane. So the first thing you might find useful is to separate properties by their kind, because the page you have just seen has different kinds of data in the view model. Something is the main data which we are focusing on. So for the product detail page, it's the product itself. So there is the current product property which holds the main data. And if you look in this property again, you can see that there are only the fields that are really needed in the page. Yeah, so product name, category ID, supplier ID, quantity, and etc. Nothing else, so no clutter, just the things the user is going to change. Yeah, so that's the main data. Then there are some properties that are just indicating in which state the page should be. Yeah, so for example, it's the isNew property, because it's just a read-only flag that tells the page, okay, you are in the insert mode or you are in the edit mode. Yeah, so this is, and it's not stored anywhere. It's just a state information about the page itself. And then we have some ambient values that basically we cannot change, but they are given to us from some other parts of the application. For example, the ID, the current record ID, it goes from the route. There is no way how the page itself can change it. It could only redirect to the same page with different ID, but it gets the ID from the route and there's no way to change it. Also, since the user is not able to change the category and supplier list on this page, I also treat this as ambient values. Typically, the ambient values can only have the getter. They don't need to be writable. So that's the isNew. There is no setter. This means that there will be only getter. Or they can be marked with the server to client first request, because we just need to deliver them to the client. And if there is no way for them to be changed, then we don't need to send them to the server and back. So you can optimize the data transfers using this bind attribute. Then it's very useful to keep the main data of the page as one object, because right now there are 6 fields, and if the application will grow and I will listen to all the requirements from my user, it's probable that in 2 years the form will have 50 fields. And if you place all the information right in the view model, so for example, I would have the product name, category ID here in the view model and not in my detail object, in my model object, then it would be problematic, because I would need to, when I'm loading the data, I would need to set 10 properties here or 50 properties here, and I would need to pass 50 parameters to this function. If it's in the model object, it's much easier, because I am just, when I need to add a new field, I will just add it to the product detail. I won't need to go through the entire view model and look where I'm working with the other properties and add my lines of code. Yeah, so this also makes the thing simple, and it also quite nicely separates the business logic of the presentation logic, because the view model really doesn't need to care which properties are in the model. For the view model, this is the model of the project, and which fields we will display, it's the view responsibility, and what we will be saving and loading, it's the business layer responsibility. Because view model is basically passing the data from the business layer to the UI and back. So it doesn't need to understand everything that's happening with the data. Yeah. So this is keeping the view model simple. And thanks to this, the view model will be shorter and cleaner. Also, you should take advantage of nesting. If the page, for example, has multiple logical sections that are basically independent on each other, it makes sense to create separate view models from them from the beginning. Not do it later, because later it can be much more complicated. Every view model will have some dependencies and you will have to tear those apart. It's easier to start with tiny view models for each logical section, and then have a one view model that will only contain the login and register objects, and these will be the nested view models, basically the child view models. Yeah, so if the page has multiple independent sections, make sure you create a separate view model for each one, And the page view model will be really simple because it will just have two properties, the login view model and register view model. Yeah. DotVVM supports this scenario, and if these child view models inherit from DotVVM view model base, they will also have the init, load, and pre-render methods, so you can override pre-render method in the login and in the register, and they will be totally independent. DotVVM will call them both, but they don't need to know about each other. They are completely separate. Also, there is the context property in the view models. For example, you can ask context to do redirects, context.redirect to route, or you can ask if it's a postback or if it's not a postback, and there is a lot of other things in the context, and both child view models will get their context property set also by .vvm, so you don't need to pass your context from the parent view model to child. One note for this place maybe, view models need to be JSON serializable, as I mentioned, which means that parents should know about the children, but the children shouldn't have a property, something like parent view model, because it would create a dependency cycle, and JSON doesn't like cycles. Yeah, so avoid referencing the parent from the child view models, and I will show a trick how to do it in a couple of minutes. Even the nested view models can use dependency injection, and we will also see this in a while. And also there is a trick if you want, for example, to create a model dialog. This is a special case, and you also want to have nested view model for model dialog. Yeah, so the contents of the window should have its own view model. It's quite common that customers at the beginning, they want this part of the page to be a model dialog, and then it gets more and more complicated, and there is a lot of content, so you will probably move the model dialog to a separate page eventually. So if you have a separate view model for it from the beginning, it's very easy to just remove the model dialog and move this to separate page, because it will have its own self-contained view model. Yeah. So if you are creating model dialogs, in 100% cases, create an independent view model for the dialog, because in the future it can only help you. If you want to create a model dialog, it's quite easy to do. With .vvm, you have seen the visible property, so you can, for example, create a div, set its visible property to is dialog open or something like that, and use a few CSS classes to make it look like a model dialog, so it will cover the page and it will display the content centered to the with some position fixed and things like that in CSS. Also, you can use the data context. There is a special feature of data context in .vvm. If the data context is null, the element will be hidden and removed from the page. And whenever the value returns to the data context, when you set something else than null, the element will be recreated back. So you can also show and hide the model dialog using the data context. So you would have some dialog view model property in your view model, and you would set it to some object which will display the dialog. And then if you want to close it, you just set it to null. And because the data context of the model dialog will be null, it will be hidden. Yeah, so this is a clever use of data context. You can find this also quite useful. If you don't want to write your own model dialogs, we have model dialogs controls in our commercial products, so you can use Bootstrap for .vvm or Business Pack. Both these packages contain the model dialog control. And in these controls, there is the isDisplayed property on the dialog, so you can use Boolean property to show or hide the dialog. Let's look how to create your own dialog. So I don't want to convince you to buy our commercial products. So in this page, I have my own dialog, and it's embedded like a user control. So let's look how it's defined. I've created a controls folder, and there is a reorder dialog control. Yeah. So it's also .dot HTML file. It has different extension. There is dot control. And you can use, I'm using Bootstrap CSS classes, so you even don't need to write your own CSS. You can use Bootstrap. So I'm using model fade in, and visible is dialog open. So I'm binding the visibility of this div element to is dialog open property in the view model. Yeah. And the dialog has its own view model. So there is the is dialog open. There is the quantity to reorder because the model dialog will contain one main data field. And there is also the product ID. Let's look how it works first. So you can imagine I have some special route products too in this application. And when you click reorder in this row, a model dialog will appear. And I can say reorder 10 items. And when I click reorder product, the dialog disappears and this value will be changed. So I'll do it once again. Focus on this value, units on order 57. And when I add additional 3, it should change to 60. Yeah? So how this is done? So I have created my own control. There is a template for it, so you can use add new item. And you can say ASP.NET Core web.vvm. And there is the user control, so you can name it and it will create a user control for you. And because it's a model dialog, I have created a view model for this dialog. I'm inheriting from .vvm view model base, so I can use the init load pre-render methods. And I'm also using dependency injection, so I'm injecting product service in the constructor of this child view model. And there are methods like show dialog, which needs the product ID because the dialog needs to remember for which product I'm reordering items. So I can just store this product ID to my property, product ID. So this is just to keep the context of the model dialog. So I know that for which product I'm reordering. And I'm resetting the quantity to reorder to 1. And I set is dialog open to true, which will display the UI. Then there is the hide dialog, which is basically this cancel button. So if I click cancel, it will call the hide dialog method. And I'm just setting is dialog open to false, so it will disappear. And there is the reorder method, which is bound to this button. And when I click it, there's a lot of things happening. Because I'm calling my business logic to do the actual reorder. So it will look in the database, it will increase the units on order item, it can do some validation checks and things like that. Then I need to hide the dialog, and then I need to refresh the grid. And because I said that this child dialog view model should not keep a reference to its parent, because it's hard to serialize this, in this case, I'm using event because it's excluded from the JSON. Events do not serialize. And the parent will listen to this event. And when I fire this event, the parent can do any action. For example, refresh the grid, which is what I will be doing. So instead of asking the parent to refresh the grid view directly, I'm just firing this reorder completed event. Yeah, so it's public event, it's action, it doesn't have any parameters, it doesn't need them actually. So I'm just calling reorder completed invoke, and this event will just be handled by the product list view model. And in the constructor you can see I'm asking also for the child view model. So the dependency injection will create the child view model for me, and I'm just setting it to the reorder dialog property. And when the child dialog fires this event, I'm just saying, okay, refresh my grid view. Yeah. This is the way how you can achieve not having a reference to parent in the child view models. And also you will avoid all the serialization issues because the events are excluded from the serialization. That's why also you need to hook on these events in the constructor, because if you do a post back and you wouldn't rehook this event, it would be lost. Yeah. So this is how the view models can basically communicate with each other, because parent can call the child because the children are referenced as a property, but the child, if the child needs to communicate with the parent, it's a nice way to use events. Okay, So that's it. And when in the page, when we need to display the dialog, it's as easy as using a link button. I want it to look like a hyperlink, so that's link button. And I'm just saying, okay, now I'm in the grid view, so I need to go one scope up. So I would get out of the products collection. And I'm going to reorder dialog, show dialog, and I'm passing the current product ID, which is stored in the model dialog view model. So on the next post back, the model dialog will know which product has been selected in the previous step. Yeah, that's why you need to store this state in the view model. And here I'm using the reorder dialog control from my controls directory, and I'm setting data context to just the child view model of the dialog. Yeah, so the data context is reorder dialog, and that's it. Okay, and one last thing, if you want to use the controls, don't forget to register those controls in .vvm startup. I'm using config markup add markup control, and I'm registering my reorder dialog, which is in this path. There is also auto-register strategy for these controls. So there is something like auto-discover controls. So you could just point them to the directory and it would discover all controls in the directory. So if you don't want to register all of them one by one, you can use this strategy. Okay. So some useful tips. Because the view models are written in the C#, then it's also easy to use the base classes and with generics and things like that. So if your application should contain hundreds of these grid detail pages, you will find out that it's quite easy to create a base class, for example, grid page view model, detail page view model, with some generic parameters for the data models. You can also very soon find that you can write a model dialog base class for all the model dialogs, because all the model dialogs will probably have the show and hide features, so that can be implemented in your base class. And there are some questions in the chat. What happens if there is already a reorder completed function added to the reorder dialog? Reorder completed plus equal statement. I'm not sure if I follow. Maybe. I hope that I understand the question correctly. But in this case, the events in .NET can have multiple subscribers. So if more places in the view model subscribe to the same event, it doesn't matter. They all will be notified. So if you want to do one thing based on this event and then do another thing based on this event, you can just subscribe multiple times. And if there is no subscriber on this event, then if you would call it like this, you would get null reference exception. That's why I'm using the exclamation, the question mark, to do this. And there is a follow-up question: would two functions get executed? Yes, they will, and they should execute in the order of their subscriptions, I hope. But it's a natural part of .NET runtime, so this should work. It's in the .NET from the first version, so I hope it's already tested enough. So, but yeah, all the subscribers will get executed. So two functions will get executed. And because every HTTP request has its own instance of the view model, then it wouldn't collide for multiple users. If there are multiple concurrent users, every user will have its own their own instance of the view model, so there should be no conflicts in this. And the subscriptions are not serialized, so when you get the same view model coming back from the client, this will be empty. Okay, so hopefully I have answered the question. If you have any other questions, follow us in the chat under the video so you can ask anything. We will be watching the conversation. Okay, so don't be afraid of creating base classes. If your application is going to be larger, you will see that there is a lot of repeating stuff in the view models. So use all the features that C# language is giving to you, because it can make your life much easier. If you want to work with collections in the view model, we have some controls for it. You have seen already the grid view and grid view dataset. You can also use just IEnumerable or lists, so the classic .NET collections. Also, checkbox control has a nice feature for working with collections. Very often in my web apps, I needed a collection of checkboxes to just select multiple IDs. For example, I had a list of countries somewhere, and I wanted to let the user select countries he has been visited or something like that. It's quite easy to do with checkbox, because there is the checked items property, which you can point to collection of any objects, or in this case I'm using strings, and then specify a checked value, which means that when you check this specific checkbox, this checked value will be added into this collection. Yeah. And also, if you uncheck it, it will be removed from this collection. And it's two-way, so if anyone in the view model changes this collection, the checkboxes will respond to this. So if they find their own value in the collection, they will make themselves checked. If they don't find this value, they will uncheck themselves. Yeah, so it's two-way, and it's very easy to, for example, allow selection of colors. So if I click on those two checkboxes, I will have red and green strings in this collection. If you use any other type than string, you should use value binding here, because if you use just this hard-coded value, it will be treated as string. So if you want to use numbers, you can use value colon and, for example, 1 or something like that, because this will be evaluated as integer. You can find more information in the documentation, and there are also examples how you can use the checkbox control. Also, what's a quite nice feature in .VVM we have added quite recently is dynamic CSS classes. I have been using a lot of web technologies, web forms, MVC, React, Angular, and in a lot of them I had to when I had to combine several classes based on some conditions, I get two expressions like that. So there is some ternary operator, and if it's active, I'm adding this active, then I need to add space, because you should separate those classes by spaces. If it's past event, I will add some other substring, and so on. And this is crazy complicated, crazy long. And in .VVM, we are using a thing called property groups, which means that if you use class dash and name of the CSS class, then you can use a simple Boolean expression. So if this is true, the element will get the active class. If this is false, this class would be removed from the element. And also, it would work on the client side. So if under this, if you would have, for example, checkbox bound to is active, so if you click the checkbox, the change will be propagated immediately, so the div will get the active class. And if there are multiple classes, they will be concatenated and separated with the space, so it will work. So this is a very nice feature. It can simplify these long expressions. So to recapitulate, view models should be clean and simple. If it's too long, do not be afraid of splitting it into multiple pieces. You should use nesting wherever possible, because all the applications tend to grow, and even if it's a simple screen with 3 fields, in few years there will be 30 fields. And if you at the beginning, if you think how the application could evolve and split the view models from the beginning, it's easier to do than do later, because you need to track who is using which property, and it gets a little bit messy. If you are using nesting, take advantage of the data context, use data context to separate or to reflect the logical structure of the view model in the UI. So if there is a piece or a part of the page which is working with a specific part of the view model, use the data context so the bindings are simplified. And also, in some cases, you may want to use the data context null feature. So if you set the data context to null, the part of the page will just disappear. And it can reappear again whenever you set the value back to the property. And if you have multiple properties in the view model, think about what they actually mean. If it's the main page data, if it's some just state information for the user interface, or if it's some ambient value which is static and which never gets changed. It's easier to separate these things and not to combine them together, because typically you will pass this information to different places. So it's a good idea to keep those things in one object, so you don't have 20 different properties in the view model. Okay, so here is another screen with the links. I have already shown it there, also posted in the chat. So the homepage .vvm.com, documentation.vvm.com/docs, and github.com riganti.vvm is our GitHub repo. Also, if you are curious about finding out which controls have which properties and what features they offer, if you go to the documentation, I hope that my internet connection is working. You can find a control reference section there, and there is a list of all controls we have with some samples and things like that. So hopefully that will work. I think that my internet has just broken, so I will not wait for it to load. I will post some links in the chat. Okay? So feel free to ask any questions in the chat. We will be here, so we will respond to everything in the chat. And after the break, there will be a session about progressive web apps. My colleague Roman will be talking about how to make PWAs, so the websites that can run as mobile apps. And this session has been pre-recorded, so he will be available for the entire time in the chat. So you can ask him questions in the chat and he will be answering to them. So thank you and see you in a few minutes.
Hi everyone, my name is Roman and I'm going to tell you something about progressive web apps and how you can create a web application using the PWA, so Progressive Web Apps technology in DotVVM. Let's take a look at progressive web apps at first so that we know what we are talking about and that we know what progressive web apps actually are and what we need in order to get an application to use this technology. So if you have an existing website that you haven't optimized in any way, you haven't even thought of creating an application, but suddenly you have a need to create a mobile application, to create an Android application, iOS application, and to distribute them to your users. So what can you do? You can either start creating the application on its own, so you can use the technologies that are used for native development or for hybrid development, such as Cordova, or you can do something like React.js, and you can turn or create a completely new application. But this is not what we are going to talk about. We are going to talk about the scenario where you have an application, a web application that is optimized for mobile phones, so you are displaying it just right, but you haven't thought of creating the mobile application, or you don't want to invest into creating a separate application in a different technology that you don't know, or creating an application on its own. So we are going to take a look at progressive web apps that can help you to turn an existing application into an actual mobile application. You don't need to do the app development. That's what we're gonna talk about. There is only a little bit of work that you need to do, and you can have an application that people can install into their phones and use. It can work offline and online. We will take a look at some approaches to this and how we can achieve this. We are not talking about hybrid applications, just as I said, and we are going to use what we already have, so we don't need to think about creating the application before we started to do the website. It will have sort of a native experience, so if you design your website accordingly, if you design it as a mobile application with animations, with transitions, then you can achieve so that the user doesn't even realize that it's a website. It's going to have an easy installation. The user can install it either from a website, so from a mobile browser, or directly from the App Store or Google Play Store. It can support native device features such as running offline, such as accessing file storage, some sensors, running in the background and providing notifications and such. And another thing that you gain by using this is discoverability, as you can create an actual application and distribute it through the stores. So you don't only need to send your users to the website and have them install it from the browser, but they can find your project in the App Store or Google Play Store and download it directly from there. First of all, the progressive web apps consist of basically two things. We're gonna talk about them. The first one is really easy, and so you can do it straight away, even for existing web application. The other one is a little bit more tricky, but we will take a look at how you can deal with it. The first one is something called Web App Manifest. It's a file that contains the metadata of your application. You link it in your HTML file, so you set where it's located in your file storage, and you put some properties in there. It's a JSON file, so you set it up so that it shows the browser stuff about your application. So it consists of things like the theme color that your application uses, so that's used in some scenarios for displaying the border and some colors in the application. It consists of icons that the application is supposed to use when you install it, the name of the application, either the short name or the longer name. You can specify both of them and they get used in different places. And the start URL where your site is supposed to launch when you run it. So when you run the application, which part of your site is it supposed to navigate? There are other properties in there as well. This is not even the complete list. These are just the main properties that you can use that we have specified for the application, but you can use others as well. You can look into the specifications for web app manifest. So this is the really easy part. You just add one JSON file, specify your properties, and you have the basic of your application. The web browser will load this data and will let you know if you can even install the application. Some browsers work even just with this file, so you just need to input the manifest.json file, and the browser will be able to install the application and get the data from the file and set up the installed application accordingly. We'll take a look at it. The other part of this that we'll talk more about is the service worker. So this is a script that is running in the background and handles the requests that your application makes, so that your website asks for. And it's a separate script that runs apart from the actual web application. So this is a script that is running in the background. It has basically nothing to do with the application that is running, that is displayed in the mobile browser or as a separate application, but it handles a lot of stuff. So what's the main important thing is that it interferes with all the requests that your website makes. What this means is that if you think about what the website does, is it sends requests to the server. So usually it sends a request to the server and it gets a response from the server. So it can ask for a file, it can ask for some HTML file or an image, a JavaScript file or whatever, or it can send an actual REST request or something. What happens with the service worker is that the service worker runs on your device. So this is a script that runs directly on the device of your user where the application is installed. And the page asks for a certain thing. So for example, for an HTML file, the request doesn't go straight to the server. It goes to your service worker, and the service worker decides what to do. This is the most basic scenario where the service worker just sends the request to the server, it gets the response and provides it back to the browser. So this way basically nothing changes, but what's important is that this part is in there, that the service worker is interfering with all your requests. So we need to think about this. What more? What can you do with service workers? You can do caching. So you can do stuff that helps you with the speed of your website. You can cache some files, you can cache some responses to requests, and that can live on the device. So now when the user sends a request, or when the site, the browser sends a request, you don't need to call the server. You just reply with the cached response that is living on the device. So this way you can feel that you can finally function offline. So you see that this can help you even with optimization of your website, or even with running completely the website offline. So this way you can achieve an offline application. Apart from that, the service worker can do background syncing, so it can update the cache, for example, on the background, even while the user is not interacting with the application, even while the application is not actually running. It can handle push notifications, so this is the scenario where the application is off, the user doesn't have it even launched, and you need to send them a push notification. So in case of native applications that you install from the store, you have mechanisms that the application can receive the push notification, and it's registered somewhere in the operation system or in the notification center. With the web technologies, you need to handle this yourself. So your website has a service worker that is somewhere in the background, and it's waiting for a push notification to happen. So this way you can even send push notifications to a device that doesn't have the site running. So the user can receive push notifications just like from a regular app, and the service worker will handle this. What's important about the service worker is that it's a separate file, it's a separate script from the actual website. So it cannot access the DOM. It cannot access the actual site. So you can't rely on stuff that is in the document, and you can't rely on modifying, for example, some elements. You can't inject stuff into the body just willy-nilly. You need to think about this, that it's a separate script. It's not part of your website. It reacts to events. So as I said, it's something that runs in the background, but it doesn't really run all the time because it would just deplete the resources of your device, and that would be quite annoying. So the service worker is basically idle on the background, and it waits for an event to happen. The event can come from the browser, so it can come from an interaction from your user, and then it interferes the request and does something with it. Or it can come from the server as something as a push notification, and it can react to that and show the push notification either in the browser or as a system push notification. What's important is that you need to have HTTPS set up for your website. This is a requirement. It's because the service worker is basically interfering with all your requests. So if you have a script running on your device and you are doing a request, you don't want to have this running over HTTP, because you could easily get a man-in-the-middle attack from this, because someone could inject a script into your website and get this behavior and modify the requests that people send to your website, or modify the responses that they get. So this would be quite bad. So that's why there is the specification that all the PWAs, all the progressive web apps that want to get installed, need to run on HTTPS. So if you don't have your site running on HTTPS, come on, what are you doing? But you need this for progressive web apps. Let's see how you get the service worker registered. So as I said, it's a script. So it's a JavaScript file, and you need to register it somehow so that the website knows where the script lives, which part of the site is supposed to handle the request for this service worker, or the service worker is supposed to handle some part of your website. You can even do that. You can have different service workers for different parts of your application. So first, if you want to register it, you check if the service worker is actually supported on the browser that you're trying to register it on. This is the check that you run. Most of the currently supported or currently used browsers have support for service workers. So you have it in Chromium browsers, you have it in Firefox, you have it in Opera and Safari and so on. So you don't need to worry much about the service worker not being there, but there are definitely some browsers that didn't get updated that regularly, that can lead you to have these as false, so you can't register the service worker in there. Then you can check if the service worker is already registered. So if this is not the first time that the user is visiting your site, and if the service worker hasn't changed in the background, so once it changes, you want to update it, but until it changed, you want to have it running and you don't want the user to constantly update the service worker. So you can check it this way. And then you run the register script. So this way you say where the service worker is, where the file is located, and you set the scope which is supposed to be handled by this service worker. So these are the statements that you need to register service worker basically. What about the life cycle of the service worker? So there are a couple of phases that it goes through. So let's see what they mean. In the installing phase, you can cache your assets. So this is the phase where the service worker is being installed. So it's not yet handling the requests, but it's in the installing phase, so stuff is already happening. In this phase, you can set it to load the data that you want to cache on the device. So you can set it to load some images, some HTML files, and so on. Then when they get cached, it can use them in further requests to respond with the object from the cache. Then it gets to the activated phase, where the service worker is already installed, is handling the request, and this is the part where you want to handle your old caches. So if you are updating your website, if you are updating and launching a new service worker, and the previous one worked a different way, it handled caches differently, and there are some files cached on the user's device, you don't want these to just lay there and not being used. So once the service worker gets activated, you want to delete the old caches and manage them so that they get transferred to the new format if you are changing something. If you are not changing anything, you can just leave this as is. After this, the service worker gets to the idle phase. So it doesn't run, it doesn't deplete the resources of the device, and it just sits in the background and waits for something to happen. Now, something can happen, so there can be a fetch where you are processing a request, and this way the service worker gets awake and handles the request. So this is the part where it actually does something. Let's see what caching strategies we have or are basically supported. You could create your own one, but these are the ones that are already prepared and you can use them very easily. We'll take a look at how you set them up. So first of the caching strategies is called network only. This is not much of a caching strategy, as we will see. So how it behaves is that the page launches a request to the service worker sends the request to your web server and sends the response back. So not much caching happening here, but this is the strategy that can be used. We'll even see it in the code. So this is one that's frequently used, but we'll take a look at other ones. The cache-only strategy is quite similar to this one, just with one slight difference, that when the page launches the request to the service worker doesn't go to the server. It doesn't run the request to the actual server. It just takes a look in the cache, and if the file is there, it returns it. So this way, you can see that you are running offline. There is no communication with the server, which can be a good thing because your application is faster and you are not depleting the networking resources. But this can be a bad thing if the file or the resource that the page asked for isn't registered in there. So if it's not in the cache, then this won't work. Let's take a look at some more advanced strategies. Network first strategy, as it suggests, it sends a request to the service worker and it tries to do a request to the server. So network first, it goes over the network and it does the request. But the server is not found. There is some problem with the online state, so the device is either offline or it's on bad connection and it didn't get through. So then the fallback is to look into the cache. So first of all, the service worker tries to run the request to the server, but it fails. So then it takes a look in the cache and returns the file from the cache if it finds it there. The other case, which is again similar, but the other way around, is cache first. So in this case, the page again sends the request to the service worker. It first looks into the cache. If the file is not in the cache, so it's a file that you haven't cached, or is the cache expired or something, then it launches the network request and returns the response from the server. So this way you get the file first from the cache. If it's not there, you go for the fallback to the actual server. The last strategy that we're going to talk about, and that is widely supported, is something called stale while revalidate. This is where the page asks for a resource to the service worker and it looks to the cache and it returns. So far it looks like the cache only strategy, because the service worker took a look into the cache and returned the file from the cache. What happens after that is that the service worker in the background runs the actual request to the server. So for the file that you asked, it first returns it from the cache and then asks for the same file to the server and saves the current version to the cache. We'll see how this behaves in the following example. So we'll take a look at this. This has a lot of advantages because usually it makes your application faster, because you get the file served directly from the cache and it updates on the background. So there is not much risk of the file being outdated. But it doesn't save any network resources, because if you think of it, it serves the file from the cache, but it launches the request anyway. So this is not the same as the cache-only approach, where it actually saved all the network resources. And we will see how this behaves. There is one slight issue with this. Let's take a look at the demo. So what we have in here is a simple to-do application. So once I log in, the login is more of a filter, but let's say I logged in as a user. I get shown my stuff, so my to-do items that are in the database. So this is an application written in DotVVM that is running on a server, and it looks just like a normal web application. There is nothing specific about it. You can add a new item. So the site consists of 3 pages basically: the login page, the to-do items page, which is a list of all the items, and then a new item, so you can add a new one in there. There is not that much of stuff happening in here. What is important is how we handle the request and what's going on with the service workers and the manifest. So first of all, let's take a look at the Google console, or the DevTools console. Okay, I'm running it in Edge, so this is running on Chromium, but no Google here. The DevTools have a section dedicated for applications. So if you take a look at the section called application, you can see all the assets that are connected to the actual application. So there is the manifest file. You can see that there is already a manifest file uploaded for this application. So it's a manifest.json that has all the necessary properties that we need for the application to work and to get installed. You can see that there is a start URL, which is just the root of the website. There are some theme colors. We have set it to work in the portrait mode as a standalone application, and so on. So this is just the file that is getting served. if we take a look into the actual website, here is the link that sets which file is supposed to be used as the manifest file. Furthermore, there is the service workers part where you can see that which service worker is installed. If it's running, you could see some errors if there were any in the background, and you can see what state of the service worker is currently happening, because it can be in all those phases. It can be in the installing phase, it can be in the idle phase, and so on. So you can see what's going on in here, and you can even unregister the script. If you open up this section with service workers from other origins, you can see all the websites that are actually using service workers. So even if you don't use service workers yourself, or your website doesn't use it, try to take a look at what websites you've visited that already have this technology, that are already working with service workers and are supporting your application in the background. So there can be stuff happening in the background if they are doing something. So these two tabs show you the stuff about your application that is installed. Let's take a look at the other stuff. Here is the storage. So this is the cache where all the files get stored. So this is where the service worker will look and ask for your files when you are offline, or when the request doesn't go through. Or if you have a strategy that's set to cache only, then it will always look in here. So let's try to erase some of the cache. Let's get rid of this part of the cache and set the site as offline and see what happens. I reloaded the website and got this nice site that tells me that your device is offline. I'll try to imagine this on a mobile device. We'll take a look at it on the mobile device later on. And this would look like your application has detected that the user is offline and show them some nice way of handling this. When I go back online and reload the page, now go back offline and reload it again, you will see that, oh, it didn't show the offline page again. If I go somewhere where I haven't yet visited, then I get the offline page. So we'll see which strategy we are using here in a minute. But you can see that it suddenly works. When I try to refresh the site, I get the content. It's offline, so the site is actually not running. And the user doesn't even need to know that this is happening. So let's see how this is done. Let's take a look into the Visual Studio. We have the project set up here. The link to the source code will be sent to you, or you can take a look at it. It's already on GitHub, so you can just download it and try it yourself. And let's take a look at what we have in here. So it's a DotVVM application, so we have a few views. There are 3 pages, just as I said. There is the login page, the list page for displaying the to-do items, and a new page that is for creating a new item. So not much exciting stuff happening here. The view models just as well, only 3 view models and the master page view model, of course. But let's take a look at the scripts. So what we have in here in the root folder is a few service workers. We have different service workers in here so that we could show how the service workers can be made. This is the most basic service worker that does only work with an offline page. So what this does is that it doesn't interfere with your requests in any way. It just sends them to the server. But when it got installed in the installation phase, it registered and saved two files. So it saved the offline fallback page, which is an HTML file, and it saved the logo that is displayed on the offline page. So if I went back offline, so this image and the actual HTML. And when the request doesn't go through, so when something happens, it returns the offline page instead of the content that was supposed to be returned. So the website asks for this document, but it gets another document instead of it, which then it displays. These documents, of course, need to be prepared. So this is just a plain HTML file and an image. This is not some dynamic content that would need to be created on the go, because you want to have these prepared and ready to be cached and used offline. So this is the only part that is handmade and not using DotVVM for creation of the website. The other parts of the website are done dynamically using DotVVM. So this is an actual website. So furthermore, what we have in here, another service worker that could be used. And this one is the cache all service worker. It uses the strategy stale while revalidate. So that's a strategy where it serves you the cached content and then it updates the content on the background. So this doesn't save the network resources, but it helps you with speed and it looks that your application is running offline. This is the strategy that is used even in this site. So we have the service worker that is running on this site using this strategy, but it's a little bit more nuanced. It has more stuff in there, so we'll take a look at it in a minute. But these two service workers are just fine if you want your application to just work and you don't need to care much about what's happening, what gets sent for different parts of the website, or taking care of the notifications and stuff. You can just take one of these, put it in your website, introduce the manifest file. So this is just a plain JSON file. And suddenly you have an application that can be installed. We'll take a look at it now. So, how do you install the application? We are running this website in a browser. This is Microsoft Edge. So if you click here, you can go to the apps section and click install the application. So what this does is it creates an application. So you can see, okay, cache of the Windows failed me, but you can see that the application is here. It's for the user, it looks like a normal application. When you run it, it shows in this kind of a window. So it shows an application that has an icon. It's launched separately, so it's not just a tab in the browser. So it doesn't open in the browser that is already running. It runs as a separate application. It shows you some information about which browser you are running in. If the user wants to take a look at it, then they can. But the application can just work. It can work offline. There is no big issue with it. The color of the toolbar is set by the application. So it's similar to the yellow that I have directly in the browser. So you can see that there is a slight difference in there. But this color is actually coming from the manifest file. So it's the theme color that is set for application. So you can have the application set the color of the toolbar. This is the most easy use case. So we can again, let's uninstall. We can uninstall the application so that it doesn't run in the application as is. This should uninstall it, and now I'm again back in the browser. If I took a look at the mobile device, so let's see how this looks on a phone. So this is my phone connected, and we can take a look at this site in, let's say, Chrome. I already have the app installed. If I didn't have it installed, you would see a prompt to install the application once you visit the website and the browser sees that there is a manifest file, there is a service worker registered, it's running on HTTPS and so on. A prompt shows in the browser that asks you, okay, do you want to install this as an application? You can just click it, set install, and it installs this site as an application. You can see that there are some other items that than those that are showing here. We'll see why in a minute. Once it gets installed, it looks just like this. So there is an icon, there is a name of the application. When I run it, it runs in full screen. I can do login. There's some issue right now, probably with the internet, so let me just restart my connection and run it again. Yeah, let's log in. So I can run it this way. You can see that there is no Chrome shown, there are no toolbars, there is nothing happening. So the user actually sees this as a mobile application. The user doesn't need to know that this is running in a web browser, that this is a website. So this way the application has a logo, it has a name, it doesn't show the browser in any way, and when you run it, it runs full screen. So it's quite nice experience for the user. Here you can see an example from another browser. This is installed from Opera. So when I run it, it again runs as a full screen application. It behaves like an application. It can run in the background. It can work in offline mode. But in Opera, the installed application shows up as this. So you can see the application logo, but you can also see the browser icon in here. So it depends for a user where they install it from. If they install it from the browser, it can behave a bit differently based on what browser they chose to install the application. We'll take a look at installing it from the App Store / Google Play Store in a few minutes. So these are the applications that got installed from the browser on the cell phone. You could see that they ran as a full screen application with no showing of, okay, we are running in the browser. And they can work offline, and they are just fine. From the user's perspective, they don't even need to know that it's a website. In fact, it's an actual website, so it's running a full screen browser basically. So it's nothing special, no special technology that is hosting the application and that is trying to interfere with it. It's just a full screen browser basically for you as a developer. You can use all the capabilities of the modern browsers, so you don't need to work with something like Apache Cordova or PhoneGap or stuff. And you can just rely on what is available in the browsers, and the user can even choose which browser they install it from, so they can have the experience that they want. All right, let's take a look at some more slides now. We'll get back to the demo in a minute. So here are the screens that our application has. So you can see the 3 screens that are dynamic, that actually work with some data and show and use and save the data into the database and so on. And then there is the offline screen, which is just an HTML file. What we are going to talk about further is something called Trusted Web Activities, which is a way to host the application and to have a easy application to install from Android. So this is what works for Google Play Store. This is an Android-only technology, but it's a quite nice way to distribute your application, and we'll take a look at how you can package your application in this way and distribute it to your users. The trusted part of the name suggests that this is a technique that you can use to tell that you are both the web developer, that you own the website that is running in there, and that you are the app developer, so that you created the actual application. You need to upload a file to your web server so that you can connect them with your application, and so that the application knows that, okay, this is the actual server that I was created for, and it's not showing some scam content. It's called a digital asset links file, and this changes how your application gets rendered. So let's take a look at it. When I take a look at my phone, there is this application that got installed as an APK. So this is an actual Android application. When I run it, it runs in this mode. So there is kind of a toolbar which shows me which browser I'm running in. So you can see that this very closely resembles the thing that I was running on in the browser on desktop. So here the user can see that, oh, okay, this is some website, what's going on? And it's running in the browser. So this is kind of a weird experience for the user. This is because I don't have the asset links file in there. So when I kill the application and I go to my server, I need to connect to the server where the application is running. So let's take a look. Oh, wow, okay. That's not ideal. Let's see. It should be running, absolutely. Okay, that's better. So let's log in, and let's take a look at our files and add the asset links file in there. So now I'm looking at the files of our web application, and in the www root folder, I can create a folder called well known, and I can create a file called asset links.json, and let's fill the file with actual data. So I have the file in here, and let's just update this over here. So now when I approach this URL, so when I get to the .well-known asset links.json, the server serves this file. It contains the fingerprint that got generated from the certificate used to sign the application. So this is how you connect the dots. This is how you connect that you are the application owner and you are the website owner. You sign the application with your certificate, and then you get created this string, which you then upload to your server so that it matches the application certificate. So now, when we take a look at the application, when we run it again, you can see that it's the same application, and suddenly the toolbar is not here. So this way, the browser knows that, okay, this application is the real deal. The website that I'm showing is connected to this app, and I can show it just as a regular application. The user can rely on the developer that it's his or her work. So let's see what to do further with your application. This is a link where you can take a look at some way to create the asset links file. It's from Google, so this is their documentation on how to get this done. We've seen the Chrome developer tools, so just to quickly repeat, you can see the stuff that your application uses and your application has set up. So the manifest file, the service workers, you can take a look at the storage. And furthermore, what you can do is that you can run an audit on your file, on your website. Let's take a look at it now. So we have our website running, and when we take a look into the DevTools, we can take a look at the audits toolbar or the tab and run an actual audit for the progressive web app. This checks the capabilities of your web app and it shows what you have set up, what you don't have set up. So what you need in order to be installable, in order to show up as an application when the browser hits the website, then you want the pop-up and you want the user to be able to install it, you just need these three things. You need to use HTTPS, you need to have a service worker installed, and you need to have a web app manifest file, which has all the properties that are needed for the application to be installed. So these are the only three things that you need. But there are some recommendations in here that will help you with getting your SEO for the website up and getting better recognition as a website and even better functionality so that it works properly on iOS and so on. So you can check in here what other things you could set up to get your application in a better state. This can help you. The other tool that can help you a lot with application development, with PWA development, is something called PWA Builder, which is a website created by Microsoft. You can also check your capabilities here, so you can run another audit so that you know that your application is okay. You can have some service workers that are already prepared and you just copy paste them into your application. So this site helps you with setting up your whole PWA experience. You can add additional features from the website, and you can even generate the packages that you can submit to the different stores. You can see that you can generate an Android application package, an application for Windows 10, or a direct package that you can upload. You can create a macOS project, so this can even create macOS application, and a Samsung package that can be used for getting installed from the Samsung stores for example, for their TVs. You can find the application here or the website. So let's take a quick look at what you can find there. So you start by entering an URL of your website so that it has something to look at and it can say whether your application is already ready or whether you need to add some things in there. You can see that this site is pretty much okay. There is just one slight modification that the PWA builder suggests, but it will run just fine. You can click the Build My PWA button in here, and here you can see all the different operating systems that are supported that you can create an application for. Let's go a step back and explore these options. When you take a look at your manifest file, here is quite a nice visual representation. You can upload all the properties in here, you can set it up, and it will generate your file so you can download it from here. So imagine that you come to this site and your application or website is not set up in any way for the PWA. You can get the manifest from here quite easily. Furthermore, if you take a look at this section, the Choose Service Worker section, you can see a bunch of service workers prepared for your application, and you can see that, for example, the offline page service worker is something that I got from this site. So you can just copy and paste it into your code. This is the code for the service worker. This is the code that you need in order to register the service worker for a website. So you put this in your site, and you can choose which one you prefer. So there are already some already prepared options in here. Okay, what about the Android application? As I said, you can download the pre-built package directly from the PWA builder. So this is the first option that you can use. I can say that I don't really like this option because I don't have many ways if I want to interfere with what the PWA builder creates. So there is just an APK that I download, the security keys come with it, and I can upload it directly to the Google Play Store, but I can't do something if I needed to. Furthermore, you can create a whole new project in Android Studio and set the whole thing up. The third option that I have here is that you can download the already made TWA Android Studio project. So it already works with the trusted web activities stuff, and it's basically a stop for your application. And you just modify a few things. Here is a link to a repository that I used for creating the sample for this demo, and here's a YouTube video where the developer shows you what you need to modify in the stuff. So when we take a quick look at it, I'm not a Java developer, I'm not very familiar with Android Studio, so this way I would actually struggle if I needed to create this on my own, but it's a very simple code. There are just a few Gradle things in here, and just a very little setup that you need to do. And you just enter a few things. You enter the site URL for your site, you change the name of your application, so when it gets installed that this is your application, and you change the icons for the application, of course, and you can create your APK from here. So it's quite easy. There are very few things that you need to change in this project to get your application up and running. So let's talk about iOS. I haven't mentioned iOS much until now. In the PWA builder, you could see that iOS is missing from there, so you cannot just generate an application for iOS from the PWA builder. So what you can do, you can have the user run your application from the browser or install it from the browser. Here is just one small caveat. When the browser shows your website, it doesn't prompt the user to install it. They can install it if they know how to. There is an option in the menu, but it's on the second screen, so they need to open the menu, they need to slide through the menu, and just then they get to the Add to Home screen button. But you can create a custom prompt that will show the users, okay, this can be installed as an app, this is an application, and if you click it, then we'll show you the system prompt and you get the install button and so on. So it can be done. It's quite easy. You can, even on the PWA builder side, you can find the script that you just put into your website and it renders the installation prompt. And it's a supported scenario, so it's supported both in Safari and Chrome and so on. So you can install it as an iOS application. It actually installs with an icon, it runs separately. The whole deal that I showed you on an Android phone runs also on iOS, so that's fine. If you want to go the App Store route, there is slightly bigger issue. Well, not slightly, this is quite an issue. You can use Apache Cordova for hosting the application. You could use it until quite recently, until the April of 2020, when the UI web view was kind of deprecated. Well, it was deprecated even before, but right now you cannot submit new applications using the UI web view, and the tools and libraries that are used for hosting PWA in Apache Cordova are a bit outdated, so they still use UI web view. There's the component for showing web views in an application. It got replaced by something called WK web view, but this is not currently in a great state in Cordova. In Cordova, actually, it's okay, but with the plugins that are supposed to be used for hosting the PWAs, it's not yet supported. We are trying to get this fixed. We are trying to look at some alternatives to this, or to get it working with WK WebView with Cordova, but currently we haven't yet figured it out. So we have a few applications of our clients running out there which are in the App Store, which use Cordova, and they run just fine. But right now it's impossible to use this technology to get into the App Store. So this is a bit of an issue which we will definitely work at fixing, but right now it's in this state, so I need to tell you this in order to have the complete information for you. So before we let's see some real-world applications that use this technology, and then we'll go back to the demo and take a look at how the notifications work and take a look at our custom service worker. So these are some types of applications that are built with PWA technologies. Not all of them use all the techniques. Not all of them are in the store as PWAs. Some of them have the website set up as a PWA, so when you visit them from your mobile device, you can install them and use them as an application. But some of them have another version of the site or of the application in the App Store or the Google Play Store. Twitter is a nice example of something that actually uses PWA. It has its own way of doing this. It did this before it was cool. So it did it before all the trusted web activity stuff and so on. So they needed to handle this in their own way. So they are actually hosting it somehow in the application. But it works as an offline, or it's as a PWA application. So this is a nice sample of this. But you can see that other applications use these technologies as well, either to help with their website, so that they are using a service worker to cache some stuff, or even to run as applications and have it installed this way. So, as I said, let's take a look at our code a bit further. So, when we take a look in the resources folder, we can see some scripts in there. I used TypeScript for creating this. The scripts are quite easy, so there's not much code in there, but I didn't want to mess with the libraries in JavaScript, and so I set up the TypeScript in here and the Webpack for building this. So let's take a look at the service worker first. Here, in the service worker, excuse me, you can see that this is a bit more code than was there in the already prepared service worker, but it's still quite okay. You can see some stuff that is connected to the notifications. We'll take a look at it in a bit. And you can see the stuff that handles the strategies for caching and for requests handling and so on. So here are some setup for the caches, for how the caches will be named. And this is the pre-cache method that gets called, and caches all the stuff that needs to be handled offline. So you can see that it caches the HTML file for the offline page, it caches the logo, and it caches the root of the website. This actually shouldn't be here. I was experimenting with something, so I'll just remove this. What I want to do is when the service worker gets installed, I want to cache all the files that need to be there in order for the application to work. So either you get in the application to an offline page, so then we will display the offline page, or you launch the application. So when the user is offline and they launch the application, we don't want them to get some bad prompt from the browser that they are offline. We want to show them something. So this way we will show them the home screen. If we don't have any dynamic content on the home screen, we can just cache it and save it. You can set the cache to expire in some way, so it will update if the user is online. But this way, when the user installs their application, they don't use it for a couple of days, and then they are offline, run it, they will see at least something. They will see the home screen, and when they click some link, they will see the offline page. Furthermore, this is one endpoint that gets registered as a network-only resource. So we'll see why. And the rest of the application gets handled by the stale while revalidate caching strategy. So this way we can see that the expiration is set to 24 hours basically. So the files get cached for 24 hours and you can do this strategy for the rest of the site, or you can, this is a regular expression, so you can set it up to handle just some part of your website, just some routes, or the whole thing. Depends on you. The last thing that is in here is setting the cache handler. So if all this fails, if it's not cached in this, if the network fails, if the stale while revalidate strategy doesn't go through, so it's not in the cache and the network is offline, it will fall back to this handler, which serves the offline fallback page. So this is just the handler that will take a look at if the request wants an actual document, so that you are not responding with HTML to some post request or so. Then it will return the offline fallback page. So this way, when everything fails, you will get to the offline fallback page. Alright, so this is quite easy. What more is in here? We can take a look at the master page where the script registration happens. So here is just a very short JavaScript which registers the service worker. It checks if the service worker is supported in the browser. I'm not checking for if it's already registered. It won't actually register it again unless something changes in the service worker. So it checks for the hash of the service worker. If something changes in the file, it will run a new installation, but until something changes, it will just stay with the old service worker and you are fine to go. So this is just a very short script. You can just change the URL to test another service worker. So if I change this URL on the server to the offline page JavaScript file, it would register the file in there and it would use that as a service worker. So this can be changed quite easily. All right. What else is there? The application file, which has some interesting code in here. First of all, this is something that we haven't shown yet. So let's take a look at how our application behaves when it's offline. So we can see that there is some prompt that, oh, you're offline. how this happens. It's quite easy. It's a very easy code. There are actually two ways in here that are handling this offline state so that we could show something, some demo of the network only resource. One way, the easier one, and that's probably the one that you will use, is to hook up an event listener to the window for the events online and offline. So this is when the user goes online or offline, this gets called. And what gets called is, okay, we are reaching into our view model. So this way, it's a bit of a hack, let's say, because you are relying on the property to be there. So if we take a look at our view model, there is a property called isPageOffline. So you can see this in C#. You can do whatever you want with it. And how to reach it from JavaScript, you can do it this way. So you can just go to the view model within the .vvm hierarchy of objects, and you can set its value. So when we are online, I set it to false so that it doesn't show the offline page notification. When we are offline, I set it to true so that it does show up. If we take a look into the site, so this is the to-do list page, we can see that this is the section that gets shown or hidden based on the isPageOffline boolean. So this is what gets set. You can set it directly from JavaScript. As you can see, there is no network request, there is no postback happening. So this way you can just set the value and it shows up. So right now the site is offline and it reacted to this. When I go back online, it gets hidden again. The other way to do this, which is about this, is that we are constantly checking if we can get a request sent to some URL. So this URL is a simple presenter in .vvm, so you can create your own presenter which just sets the status code and sends back the response. There is nothing happening in here, so not much chit chat going on, not much data exchange between the server and the client. But this request goes out every 10 seconds and it checks if it can get to the server. If it times out, so there is a timeout set up for 3 seconds. If it times out, it sets again the property to true so that it shows the state. If I didn't have this in here and went offline, it could take up to 13 seconds, so 10 seconds until it gets called and 3 seconds until it times out to show the actual offline state. But this is a quite nice way to handle if I can actually reach my server. If I don't trust the events from the web browser for some reason and I actually need to check if my server is responding, then you can do it this way. What's important about this is that in the service worker file, we have this network only strategy. If I didn't have this line of code in here, so it would look like this. The first time that it asks for the request for the URL, it would find out that, okay, it's not in the cache, so let's load it from the server and put it in the cache. So then the second time it asks for it, even if you're offline, it gets returned to you from the cache. So you wouldn't even know that your server is down because you would get it from the cache. The service worker on the background would have some issues with this. It would complain that, okay, I can't update this from the server, but it's already cached. It will be cached for 24 hours. So you're out of luck for checking for the offline state. So this is why there is the network only strategy used for this. Okay. What else we have in here is handling of notifications. So if you want notifications, here we use Firebase. We use Firebase for sending the notifications and for registering the devices or the browsers for the notifications. This is the initializing and asking for permissions. So here you initialize your messaging, Firebase messaging, and you set it so that you show which service worker is being used for handling the notifications when you're offline, when you're running in background, so when the application is not running. And here you ask for permissions, so if the user hasn't yet given you the permissions to allow notifications for this website, you ask them for getting the permissions and you save the token. Here again, how do we save the token? We again set it directly from the JavaScript to our property, which is again in the master page. So here we have the property that we save it to. And then once we log in, so this is where the user actually clicks the login button and gets redirected to the to-do list page. We check if the username is actually entered in there and if the token is fine, so that the user gave us permission to send them notifications. And if this is the case, then we save the token to our database. So that we know that this user has this token associated to them. User can have multiple tokens associated to them because they could open your application in different browsers, they could open it in different devices and so on. So this way you can register multiple devices, multiple browsers for your user. We'll see how the notification looks, and we will take a look at the notification in a bit. And after this, the user gets redirected to the item list page. So that's the page with all the items in there. What happens with the notifications? When we send the notifications to the user, to the browser, we want to somehow display them. So here is a way to handle the messages when the application is running. So when you have the site displayed and the notification comes in, the service worker won't get it or won't be able to show it as an actual notification as in the system. You could do this from the website, so you could handle it here and show it as a notification on your device. But here we are just showing it in the website. So we get the data from the notification, we get the title and the body from the notification that got sent to us, and we again set it to our .vvm properties. So let's take a look at this. There is a property called push notification content, and it has a title in there and a body. So this way we set the properties and we can show it somewhere. So if we took a look into the master page, we could see that there is a section where we are showing the push notification. So we are basically constantly showing it, just hiding or displaying it based on if there is a title in there. So we are checking if the title is not null, then this can be visible. And there is the title in there, the body, and a button to hide the notification or to clear the content. If we took a look at this, it just resets the notification content so that we can again fill it with data from the JavaScript file if we needed to do that. Furthermore, in the service worker, what we have in here is, again, we are setting up the messaging. So here you can see that the Firebase again gets set up and we get the messaging from there. And we set the background message handler to show the notification. So let's take a look at this in action. let's take a look at the site. We add a new to-do. And set the notification to some nice time. Let's say a minute from now in the future. Let's click the save button. And let's open it up also on the mobile phone. And let's see what happens now. So what handles the notifications is Azure function that is running and checks every minute if there is a notification and sends it to our devices. Okay. Nope, that was a different notification. Okay, what actually happened in here? There might be some issue. Let's take a look again. The time looks okay. The difference between the current time and the time displayed here is because of UTC. So this discrepancy is because I'm 2 hours away from the UTC, but we are setting this as UTC time. So I might be locked out because I deleted the cache and the history. So let's try one more time. All right, so let's put it on 10:53 a.m., which should happen in about half a minute. And let's also reload it on the mobile device just to make sure. Okay, where is the mobile device? Here. So now the notification should show up also in the website here running, also in the mobile application, and we'll see if it works. Then it should even show up in our notification center. So we'll see what happens in a few seconds. Oh, and it didn't show up. Okay, so there's something broken in here. However, we can at least show that the stale-bar revalidate strategy is making our website behave in a weird way. We can see that the finish item is in here. If I refresh, oh, suddenly this one appeared. If I click this and make it complete, reload the page, oh, it's not behaving as I expected. Now just it happens. So what we are seeing here, and you could see this also on the mobile devices, you are getting one item older than you actually want. So you are getting the HTML from the cache, and just then it gets updated. So this way you can see that this is not always what you want as for your users. You don't want them sometimes to get the older version. So this way you want to use different strategies for different parts of your website. If the part of your website doesn't make sense for caching, so there is some dynamic data, there is something showing up for the user, and you don't want them to see an older version of your website, you will use, for example, the network only or network first strategy, so that they get it directly from the server, and if something fails, they can get the cached version at least. But if you have some parts of your website that are fine for getting older response and updating on the background, then you can use the stale-bar revalidate strategy. So this depends on which part of your site you want to have registered. But the main idea is that you don't need to really think about this while you're creating the website. You will create your website just as you are used to, and then you can add the service worker in there, add the app manifest in there, and you are good to go. The application can be installed, you can create the Android application, and so on. So the notification part didn't really work. I'm not exactly sure what happened in here. It worked just a few minutes before I started to do this demo. I tried it. So there might be some issue with the Azure function that is sending the notification or something else. The setup that is shown here should work, so there might be some caching issue or something with the token. The important thing is that once the service worker gets updated, so you install new service worker, you get a new token from the Firebase messaging service. So every time you get a new service worker installed, you need to update this token on the server, because if you send it to the old token, nobody receives it. There is not a thing to show. Oh, it woke up, so suddenly the notification came in. I'm not sure why so late. Maybe the Azure function took a bit to load. But you can see that, okay, so here it displayed in the browser. Here it also displayed in the browser, the application is running. So this is the part where the app.js file handled it, and it showed it. It filled the property that was supposed to have the notification content in there, and showed the content accordingly, because the website is showing the notification when there is a title. So when the title got filled in there, this got shown up. I can close it this way, and if we take a look into the notification center, this is from the application that is installed there as an APK. So there is an application running, not running, the service worker is idle in the background, and it handled the notification and showed it in the notification center. Here in Windows, it didn't pop up because I have the application running, so it came to this website. If I closed it and set up another notification, it would actually pop up as a system notification in Windows just as well. So these are the two ways to handle the notification, and you can see that it depends on whether your application is running or not, but you can even you can set it up to show the system notification even from the running application, just so that we can see that you can handle it differently if the user is running your application actually. All right, so with this in mind, you could see that it's quite easy to create an app from your existing website. It's quite easy to set the tokens to just send it from the JavaScript back to .vvm and to set it to the server. And it's not much of a work if you just need to create a basic application from your existing website. So this way you can use the technologies that you already use, that you already know, the websites that you've already created, and make some nice applications from them, submit them to the stores, have your users install them from browsers, and so on. All right, so that's it from me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I will be here after the session, so to answer your questions. Okay, thank you for your attention.